Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Climate Week NYC. Woo! Let's have a round of applause, please. I also want to wish the space that we're in, WNYC, happy 100th birthday. Give them a round of applause, please. It's the perfect week to celebrate it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dani Nierenberg, and I am president and co-founder with Bernard Pollock of Food Tank. Food Tank is a research and advocacy organization devoted to telling stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems around the globe. We do this with the aim to inspire, motivate, and ultimately activate positive transformation in how we produce and consume food. I couldn't be more thrilled to be partnering with American Farmland Trust on this really important summit about building climate resilience through agriculture. We are at a really critical moment right now. 2023 was the hottest year on record, and this year is set to be even hotter. Temperatures this summer exceeded 50 degrees Celsius in some parts of the world, which is crazy to me. I can't wrap my head around it. Biodiversity is disappearing, soils are being stripped of nutrients, droughts are increasing in severity and frequency. So the climate crisis is more real than ever. But we aren't here to talk about the gloom and doom. We're here to talk about stories of hope and success. And we're going to focus on solutions. We know cover cropping can improve soil health and boost resilience to extreme weather events. New technologies and innovations can help us use land more efficiently and help diversify farmers' incomes. And offering stable markets for producers can help them transition to more regenerative farming practices, improve biodiversity, and ultimately achieve economic stability, which is so important. But we need to scale up these solutions up and out and fast, right? So the question is, how do we do that? How do we balance this idea of urgency and hope? How can we make sure that policymakers at all levels are pushing for these changes? And how can we make sure that women and youth are part of decision-making processes and that communities are co-developing and co-creating the solutions that we all need? We have a really great agenda today that will help us dive into these questions. We'll hear from policymakers, farmers, advocates, business leaders, filmmakers, and other experts. I want to thank, again, our amazing partners at American Farmland Trust, especially Joy O'Shaughnessy and John Piatti. John has been such a hero in this space, and I am honored. I can't tell you how honored it is for us at Food Tank to be partnering with John and the whole AFT crowd. They're just amazing. Could you give them a round of applause, please? They're just fantastic. I also want to thank our hosts at WNYC, including Ryan Wild and Ricardo Fernandez. Please give them a round of applause. None of this could happen without them. And you just had a great breakfast, right? Yes? Right? Please thank great performances, including Liz Newmark, Janelle Cruikshank, and Lauren Traeger for putting together that delicious menu. They are incredible. Round of applause. So before we dive in, I just need to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. The discussions you will hear today will be very, very fast-paced and dynamic. If I have to cut something short, Food Tank events always end on time and begin on time. If I have to cut anything short, please forgive me later. There will be time for networking and talking to speakers, I promise. And if what we want to happen is that you share the moments that are most impactful for you. So use the hashtag Climate Week NYC. You can also reach out directly, and my phone is right over there, directly at Danielle at foodtank.com, and I'll do my very best to get back to you throughout the day. So I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for this very packed agenda, so please join me in welcoming our first speaker, John Piatti, the President and CEO of American Farmland Trust. You can keep clapping, for his remarks. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dani. That's great. Well, it's wonderful to see all of you here. It's great to be together in this space. Dani laid out the plan for the next few hours, I want to begin by giving you a little history and by stretching you to think about some of these issues around climate and agriculture in a slightly different way, a bigger way, a systems way. But let's start with a little history. So there were two events that occurred in fall of 2018 that really propelled forward this idea of agriculture as a climate solution. In October of that year, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, issued a report, as they do every year, but the report in 2018 made it very clear that as critically important as it was to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that were occurring, that would not be enough. That we also had to pursue so-called natural solutions. And one of those, at the top of their list, was the potential power of regenerative agricultural practices. Practices that, yeah, good stuff, real hope, we'll get to that. Practices that would build soil health and in so doing naturally sequester atmospheric carbon. Now, there are many benefits of building soil health, including carbon capture, and it's not a new idea. In some ways, it goes back to indigenous practices and things that were being done a millennium ago. But in more recent times, it's really been something of the last 40 years or so, where a few forward-looking government officials, policymakers at times, academics, and some non-governmental organizations like American Farmland Trust that I had had the opportunity of running since 2016. We've been in this space. American Farmland Trust, AFT, I'll use the abbreviated version in the interest of time here. AFT in some ways led this charge. In 1981, Nierenberg, who was then the chief of USDA's Soil Conservation Service, he lost his job when President Reagan came into office, and he came to work for AFT for the next 26 years. AFT had been formed the previous year, in just 1980, under somewhat unique circumstances. The 70s were a period of real tension between the environmental and the agricultural communities. And AFT was specifically formed to try to bring those two worlds together. As such, we created and then led a conservation coalition comprised of a small handful of those agricultural organizations and environmental organizations that were willing to sit down at the table and work together. Under Nierenberg's leadership, AFT developed a white paper on soil health. That became the intellectual fuel behind this coalition's advocacy efforts that led to the incorporation in the 1985 Farm Bill of the conservation title. Now, again, good thing to applaud, good stuff, because it is the conservation title that has, since 1985, really been the primary instrument through which regenerative practices has been discussed and advanced. That's one event, the ICP report. The second event occurred in November of 2018, when the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives. And what that meant was that Speaker Pelosi created a special select committee on the climate crisis. Now, AFT helped plant a seed at that time with some key members in Congress that when this committee met, agriculture should be on their agenda, and talking about agriculture in a different way, as a hopeful potential solution to the climate crisis. AFT was one of the entities that testified, and one of our research scientists shared data that had been compiled and research done with USDA's Agricultural Resource Service that basically showed that agriculture done right could actually not only bring American farming to a place of carbon neutrality, but ultimately go beyond that, be a carbon sink to help offset emissions from other sectors. This is huge. Such hope, right? This is huge. So for the first time, some policymakers and members of the public were realizing the incredible power of agriculture, not just to grow our food, but to provide critical ecological services that were desperately needed to heal our planet. Now, this new awareness of agriculture as a potential climate solution has played out now in multiple ways, but I'm going to focus on just one because it's really a sea change. Congress in 2022 passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which included $20 billion for the agricultural programs that were in the conservation program. This is significant in two ways. The first is the amount of money. The conservation title since 1985 had basically provided about $100 to $110 billion worth of cost share programs for farmers, about $3 billion a year. The IRA in one fell swoop was adding $20 billion on top of that amount. Huge, huge. But the second point I think is more significant, and that is for the first time ever, Congress, through its actions, was recognizing that the programs in the Farm Bill's conservation title, the tried and true practices, were part of the answer to combating climate change. This is a complete mindset change. Congress had never made that statement in that way before. It is truly significant. They were saying we have the tools, we just need to bring it up to greater scale. Good stuff all around. And yet, I don't want to give anyone the idea that these funds are the full answer. Far from it. It's a down payment on what we need. But actually, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the other thing I don't want you to get in your brain and get focused on. Most of these programs are about pushing for regenerative practices, which are incredibly important. But the primary point I want to leave you with today is that it takes more than regenerative practices to make this work. They are not the full answer either. They're only going to produce the results we need with climate if we have sufficient farmland and if we have the right farmers and ranchers who are following those practices and can afford to stay in business as they do so. So, there's a lot at stake here. The way American Farmland Trust sees it is it's about the practices, obviously, but it is also about the land itself, and it's about the people who steward that land. We view it as a system. It's a three-legged stool. Now, some of you may be saying, of course, that's obvious. But there's some nuance in what I'm about to talk about. So listen carefully. Let's start by talking about farmland and talking about the interplay between farmland and better farming practices. Now, American Farmland Trust for decades has been tracking farmland loss, and at present we lose about 2,000 acres a day. 2,000 acres a day, 750,000 acres, 750,000 acres every year. Now, the good news is 45 years ago, that rate was actually a lot higher. The steps that have been taken with farmland protection and smart growth have made a difference. But that is still way too much farmland to lose. Way, way too much. But the loss of farmland means more than you may think. Obviously, with every acre you lose the potential of that acre of land to be used for regenerative practices that would bring back a whole host of environmental benefits, water recharge, wildlife habitat, biodiversity, and of course, carbon sequestration. So you lose an acre of land, you lose that potential. But it goes beyond that. With every acre that you lose, you also put more pressure on the remaining land to be farmed in a way that in many instances will mean fewer environmental benefits. You know, how great it is that farming can simultaneously provide our food and ecosystem services. It's wonderful. And indeed, some form of regenerative practices on some farms can actually elevate the level of food production. But let's be real about this. The truth is that if we have to increase food production or even maintain current production on fewer acres, the need to maximize food production is going to mean more industrial agriculture and heavier reliance on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and the like. Losing farmland not only reduces the potential of that land to be used for to be farmed well, but it almost ensures that other farmland will be farmed more poorly. It's a negative feedback loop, right? It's this downward spiral. Beyond this, AFT's research has documented the fact that there are direct climate benefits from farmland protection in avoiding the emissions that would come from development of that land. And beyond that, keep in mind that a lot of the negatives from agriculture stem from the fact that we in other parts of the world are deforesting land or taking native prairie and turning it into industrial agriculture, in part because we are losing existing farmland. So what's the bottom line on all of this? It's that saving land that is currently farmed is a critical environmental and climate solution. And yet farmland loss barely gets mentioned when we talk about agriculture and climate. In truth, now, we don't really know how much farmland we need to both feed the planet and provide critical ecological services. The studies that have been done to date really focus only on food production, with no regard to the need for farmland to provide these broader services. And perhaps that's understandable, because this is a big, complex issue. AFT has been doing research in this space for the US for 40 years at the intersection of land use and practices. And we're barely beginning to get our heads around this. Ultimately, this is going to take a major international effort to get us where we need to go. Who knows where that research would lead? But I think I can say one thing with assurance, and it's this: the amount of farmland that we need to both feed us and heal our planet is more than the amount of farmland we will need to just feed us if we don't intend to use agriculture as a climate solution. And that would be a travesty. So at this juncture, until we know more, let's do everything we can to save every acre of farmland that we may need. Now, let's switch. Let's talk about the third leg of the stool, right? Let's talk about farmers. As great as it is that regenerative agriculture done on enough acres of land can be a climate solution, if we don't have farmers who are committed to these practices, trained in these practices, and able to be successful in their business following these practices, it all goes for naught. Now, farming is complex. Regenerative agriculture can be super complex. It can require extra training. It can require special equipment. It's also just a tough thing for farmers to change their operations. But the good news is, even though we have an aging farmer population, we have many people who want to get into farming. That includes young people, and that includes people in mid-career, midlife, who want to start another career. But the barriers are high. And one of the greatest barriers is the cost of entry because of the high price of farmland. Now, this is one of many places where the three legs of the stool come together. One highly successful strategy to lower the cost of farmland is to permanently protect it with an agricultural conservation easement, which will not only make sure that that land is forever available for farming, but will make sure that if in the future it sells, it will sell as its value for farming, not its development value. In many parts of the US, this is a highly effective tool to make land more affordable for incoming farmers. Beyond this, we clearly know that incoming farmers are frequently much more open to the idea of new practices, regenerative practices in particular. But beyond all of that, AFT studies have shown that on protected land, whether you're a new farmer or an established farmer, you are far more likely to be thinking about soil health for obvious reasons. If you can't sell your land for development, your soil is your asset. So, land, practices, people. It all comes together here with one building upon the other. This is the value of a system, right? There's the negative feedback loop that I talked about before with farmland loss, but the example I just gave you is a positive feedback loop. We need to avoid those negative ones and build upon those positive ones. That's the key. Let me end by saying this. I suspect that everyone in this room is deeply committed to combating climate change and see the hope and potential of agriculture as one part of the answer. Some of you may be primarily excited about regenerative practices, and for good reason. You know, at AFT, I bet 75% of our staff who are working with farmers are doing so primarily to advance regenerative practices. It's important stuff. Focus is important. Good, yeah, applaud. We're here to applaud. These are all good things that are happening. Great things are happening, beginning to happen at scale. We need to take it to a higher scale. But the message I want to convey, and this is not meant to be a downer message, this is meant for you to think more broadly about how all these things are interconnected, is that we can deepen our understanding that beyond practices, we need to pay more and more attention to the land itself, and far, far more attention to the farmers and ranchers who steward that land. They are the ultimate key to success here. We sometimes, in parts of this country, I'm from Maine, you know, in Maine and the Northeast, we've elevated farmers in many cases to be heroes, at times climate heroes. That's wonderful. But that's not the case uniformly around this country. And we are increasingly seeing situations of people villainizing farmers because they're too big or they're this. We need all farmers, but we need all of them to elevate their game and do what's better by the earth. So think about practices, think about the land, and think about the people. Thank you very much.
We have time for one question from the audience. And by a question, I mean a question with a question mark at the end. All right? So I see somebody back here. There is a roving mic. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thanks so much. You mentioned indigenous principles, farm basis for regenerative ag practices. My question is simple, hopefully. Is AFT collaborating with Native American lands, jurisdictions to encourage new farmers focusing on community-based farming there so that we can undo the food deserts across all our Native American lands and essentially preserve indigenous knowledge and ancient practices?
Yeah, great question. Woo. Critical area. You know, next year, AFT will work directly with probably 25,000 producers. That's our term for farmers and ranchers. I would say about a quarter of that will be historically underserved populations, including indigenous populations. We're doing a lot of work with black farmers as well. The future of agriculture will depend on everyone's engagement, and we are totally focused and committed to that kind of work. Thank you.
Stay right there. Oh. I lied. We have time for one more question. Right here. We're going to bring you a mic. Hold on 1 second. And Jared's going to hold on to that mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I got it.
Oh, thank you. I just want to question about the farmland loss that you were saying. Mm-hmm. Loss to what? To retail? Or because there's also information about we're losing farmland when it comes to small family farms to bigger farms. So we still have the same land to farm, mm-hmm. but a different kind of share of farmers. Yep. So I was wondering, what do you mean?
Good questions. I urge all of you to go to our website, look out Farms Under Threat. There is more detail and data in there than you could ever want on farming. Farmland loss due to development pressures, farmland loss due to climate change, farmland loss due to solar development, which we're going to hear about later. But your question about, is that really loss? Yes. That 2,000 acres a day is land that goes out of agriculture. Out of agriculture. There is the phenomenon you're talking about, where there are small farms that are being gobbled up. Consolidation is occurring. That's land that's still in farming. One could argue whether there's enough eyes to acres ratio to have that all farmed really well. That's another next time with Food Tank, we can talk about that. But that is happening. But even when you take that into account, the actual number of acres being lost to agriculture is roughly 2,000 acres a day. Thank you.
All right, I'm still stalling, John. We're waiting for your friend.
Oh, okay, I understand now.
All right, another question. Again, make it a question. And I know you like to talk.
So your rate is about to triple or quadruple in the next 10 years because of the land that will be lost in the San Joaquin Valley and the land that will be lost along the upper and lower Colorado River Basin. It will overwhelm the current rate.
I'm going to have to cut this off.
What
I'm
do
gonna
you
have to
do?
cut it.
What
No,
do you do
I have to
about
cut
that?
it off. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to take the seat at the,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Wherever you'd like to sit, my friend. It's so nice that, I'm sorry I had to cut off the question. So I want to thank John for his remarks. It really sets the stage perfectly for the themes that thank you, Ricardo, for the themes that we're going to talk about today. But now we're going to head into our first fireside of the day. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce John Kerry, the 68th U.S. Secretary of State and the former Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. He has been an incredible advocate, it's giving me chills, for solving the climate crisis. Please give him a huge round of applause and thank him for being here. Thank you so much.
God, after
honored.
that, I should definitively not open my mouth. Just let it ride. Thank you all. Goodbye.
What a pleasure.
I regret. Let me say, as I say hello, I regret. I am really pushed for time, unfortunately, because I need to go. Some of you may know the name Martin Indyk. He passed away the other day. And so I need to go to his memorial service. So forgive me when I
Well, we will dive in then.
dive in, John.
All right.
Thank you.
You've been such an outspoken advocate for climate action for decades. So let's start by just hearing a little bit about your personal journey. How did you get to this point?
Took a left on Baker and came. Yeah. No, I was very blessed. My mother was a huge environmentalist, and your chair of the board, Grant Winthrop, I don't know if he's here anywhere.
He's not.
But Grant is my cousin, first cousin, and I spent a lot of time on their farm up in Massachusetts as a kid. And then my family, we lived on a farm for a period of time in Millis, Massachusetts, and I used to sit in the tractor seat and listen to the guy who was driving it swear like a bandit. Learned all those good words. But bottom line is, I just, Rachel Carson had a profound impact on me in 1962 and on a lot of us. And then when I came back from Vietnam, I first became involved in Earth Day as an organizer in New England. And, we brought 20 million people out of their homes to say we don't want to live in the middle of smog in New York and Los Angeles and places. You couldn't see across the city in those days. So we then built that into a political movement. We targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress in 1970. We called them the Dirty Dozen. We had a huge campaign against them. And we defeated 7 of the 12. And immediately Richard Nixon realized, this is a voting issue. This is what you have to make it. And so we passed the Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water, Marine Mammal Protection, Coastal Zone Management, Endangered Species, and we created the Environmental Protection Agency of America. So,
What a legacy.
where it came from. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Anyway, but that's how I got here.
Yeah.
And in the Senate, I was privileged to lead the efforts in the Senate to try to get, in 2009, when Obama
Yes,
came in.
Waxman-Markey.
We tried to get Waxman-Markey through the Senate with Lindsey Graham, Joe Lieberman. We had a massive attack on Lindsey Graham by a coal company that did not want to progress, and it just forced him away from the effort. So it was
Well,
sad.
thank you for your efforts on that. It was before my time at AFT, but AFT led the charge on the ag side of Waxman Markey, and what a
Everything was before our time.
But climate change is obviously, arguably, the greatest challenge facing our world. And the topic's obviously complex, multifaceted. Today, we're really talking about agriculture as a potential solution. Many of us in the room live and breathe that angle. Your approach to climate change has been all over the map in every area. So it's important for those of us who are focused on the ag side to hear some insights from somebody who's looked at it in a bigger picture. How do you see agriculture fitting into this puzzle?
It's an essential ingredient. It's one of the sectors. I mean, oceans, agriculture, land management, farming practices. We've learned a lot, and they're critical. The Biden administration has taken that very, very seriously, folks. I mean, we, without prompting, when we were in Glasgow for the first COP that I took on as, well, no, it wasn't the first. I was the lead negotiator in Paris and supervisor of negotiations. I was Secretary of State then. And then when we went to Glasgow and to Sharm el-Sheikh and to Dubai, agriculture was front and center in all of our thinking and work. And the Biden administration, in its investment in America agenda, put about $19.5 billion on the table for agriculture. During that period of time, a massive number of farmers, of producers, were enrolled in conservation programs within the administration, about 5,300 producers to be precise. And agroforestry, precision farming, regenerative farming, all of these things crossed my desk anyway. And when we went to Glasgow, we created, together with the UAE and the EU, the Agriculture Innovation Mission, Aim for Climate, which has helped to produce resilience advances, adaptation advances, et cetera. And, agriculture is obviously critical all around the world. I mean, droughts and lack of water and hotter days and extreme heat and extreme events and floods which wipe out crops. I mean, everything just flows in a sort of sequence. And I think, you all have done a terrific job over time in helping to educate people about this. And Grant's brother, my first cousin, Fred Winthrop, was our agriculture commissioner in Massachusetts for 3 successive terms. And so this is sort of, I guess, running the family.
Yeah, well, Fred was one of the founders of American Farmland Trust, as you know, and got us on the right track. You mentioned the Biden administration, and what this administration has done to address climate is unprecedented, particularly in the ag sector. How do we both secure those gains, and then how do we over time build on them?
We secure those gains by having the right outcome on November 5th. Let me be clear about that. And I didn't come here, I'm not, I don't want to turn this into a partisan event, obviously. It's not. But that's just a reality. If you pull out of the Paris Agreement, as he did and has promised to do again, if you don't fund any of the initiatives, and if you insult people's intelligence by saying it's a hoax and so forth, I think we have every reason in the world to care about that outcome. And I think for farmers around the world, around the United States, they have clearly benefited from Tom Vilsack's stewardship, which is quite extraordinary. I don't think there's anybody I know who's more knowledgeable or more savvy and has brought people to the table who might have never thought about coming to the table. So this has become a really collegiate effort for agriculture, John. I think you know that as well as anybody. And if we want that to continue, we cannot have a project 2025 be implemented or be even close to the table. And that's just a reality. It's a fact. It's a choice between going backwards or going forwards.
Well, we can't thank you enough for the leadership role that you've played. I know you have time constraints. It's been such an honor to have you here, but I want to give you a chance if you have any final comments to this group, any words of wisdom?
I don't know if it's a word of wisdom, but I would say to everybody, be optimistic about this, because we can be. We have the ability to win this fight. What we really do. And what's happening with technology now in storage, for instance, for batteries, so it's now solar plus, and we change the amount of time that that we're able to work exclusively on renewables. We begin to provide energy security, and as that energy security takes hold and more advances come in line, I think geothermal is in our future. There's going to be a lot more potential there. We are pursuing very hard every technology available. Right now, it's all of the above. And so I think you just have to have confidence. We have the best ingenuity in the world here in this country. What we don't have is the best politics. And what we need to do is win back our ability to control where we're going by being sensible, by restoring facts to essential decision making, and not avoiding the realities. I mean, what we're doing to try to deal with climate is not the conjured up agenda of one candidate or another, or liberal, conservative, or Democrat or Republican. It is entirely driven by thousands of scientists who for 30 years now have been telling us what's going to happen, and whose analyses are based on physics, mathematics, chemistry, biology. And that's what we have been guided by. And I think if all of us will keep fighting for the facts, the restoration of factual decision making, not an alternative reality that's based on fiction, we will win this battle if we hold that ground.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, John. All right. Whew, that was great. I am squeezing in here. Sorry. I am thrilled and honored that Secretary Kerry was able to be here and share those remarks with us. I want to thank John for moderating such a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank Secretary Kerry's mother for being an environmentalist and raising such a great environmentalist who inspires us all. So let's give that a round of applause. And I also want to repeat what Secretary Kerry said about being optimistic. We have to be optimistic. It can be very daunting as we go through Climate Week and as we all gear up for COP in Azerbaijan. We have to be optimistic, and we have to remember that we can create the world that we want to see, and that it has to be backed by science. And I just love that Secretary Kerry was able to reiterate that. I'm really thrilled for our next panel, which is on empowering regenerative practices through the protection of our farmland. We have a wonderful group of experts, so I'm going to introduce them all, and they'll all come up on stage, and you can clap as you see fit, but you should clap for all of them. Klaus Martens, a farmer and co-owner of Lakeview Organic Grain, and Klaus and Mary Howell Martens Farm. Round of applause for Klaus. Josh Morgenthau, the owner and operator at Fishkill Farms. Round of applause. Mary Claire Whelan, a farm manager at Macero Community Farm. Round of applause. And Dr. Beth Sauerhaft, Vice President of Programs at American Farmland Trust. Round of applause for her. I'm so thrilled to be sharing the stage with all of these folks. And I want to take a moment while they're getting settled and getting arranged to thank some of our in-kind partners, including Arrow Farms, Appeal, Aturea, Beans' How, Bonterra Wine, Bowery Farming, Brooklyn Brewery, Certified Origins, Flora Food Group, Farmer's Fridge, and Gotham Greens. Round of applause, everyone. I make you clap a lot because it keeps the energy up, right? And I can't see all of you, so it reminds me that there's a lot of people here. So, Beth, I'm hoping I can start with you. We've been talking about this. I want to start by talking about the incentives that are needed for regenerative farming practices. Can you talk about what the research is showing? What are you seeing?
Sure, thanks, Danny. So American Farmland Trust has carried out research looking at the impacts of the Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, which started in the mid-90s. And that was a federal matching program where funds were provided to state and local governments and tribes and land trusts to help them work with landowners to protect their farms, put conservation easements on them. And so what we've seen is that, of course, there's the benefit of these programs that they are keeping land in agriculture. So when you protect land, of course, it stays in agricultural land so you can keep farming it for the duration. In addition, we're seeing that it's helping other farmers access land because it impacts the cost of the land. And we're also seeing that it really has encouraged a lot of adoption of conservation practices, some of what John was talking about a little bit earlier. So we have seen that in surveys that we've done of these farmers who own FRPP protected lands, 62% of them have a conservation plan on that farm. 93% of them have at least one conservation practice. 86% have at least 2 conservation practices, and then 78% have at least 3 conservation practices. And this is higher than the normal average of across all farmers. And so these are things like conservation tillage, where you're not turning over the soil in between each cropping season, or you're using a nutrient management plan, or you're putting in riparian buffers, things that are really helping to build the soil health and to build wildlife habitat, and there's other environmental co-benefits. In addition, what's pretty cool is we're seeing that 81% of first-generation protected landowners and 72% of second-generation landowners of protected lands have definitely said that having protected land status has really encouraged the adoption of conservation practices.
Common sense, right?
It really is. And a really cool little factoid is in the Midwest, the bread basket, the corn belt of this country, on average, for every 1 ton of corn that is harvested, we are losing 2 tons of topsoil. That's nutrients and soil health, that's sequestered carbon going down the rivers.
And where's that corn going, Beth? We have to talk about that for a second. It's going to ethanol and to livestock for the most part.
Yes, and yes.
So it's not food for humans. I just want to make that clear.
Right. It's going for things that we're all consuming, definitely. And I think, so having thrown out a few of those statistics, I think it's interesting. We've got 3 farmers up here who have land that is protected or soon to be protected, and it'd be really great to hear, like Mary Claire, how do you respond to some of those facts that I threw out there? Because you guys are living this.
Yeah, thanks, Beth, and thanks for having me today. I think, the statistics that you explained make perfect sense to me. So I'm a first-generation farmer, and before I was the manager at Massara Community Farm on Wappinger and Pawcusset land in Woodbridge, Connecticut, I was the coordinator of the new Connecticut Farmer Alliance. And so through that job, I got to know so many of the producers in our state, working from, quarter-acre plots in their backyards to some of the biggest dairy farms that we have in the state. And really what hit home for me through that work and through farmers just being my community, and what's really true for myself, is that I'm not like farming because I grew up on a farm, or I wanted to farm, and then climate work is something that I'm like doing on the side or need to be incentivized to do. I want to wake up every morning and go outside and put my hands on the soil and do something that is directly making an impact on climate mitigation and is working to build more resilient, more thriving local communities. And farming is just the best way that I found to do that. And I think that's true for a lot of the farmers in my generation who are getting into this work because we see the climate crisis around us, we feel it, and we want to do something about it. But that work, that climate mitigation work, the sort of investment that you have to make in building soil health, in planting perennial crops that don't just, stay easily there after one season. I'm out there pulling mugwort every single year, multiple times a year. Like, I have to know that I'm going to be able to farm that land in the long term. And I have to know that the next generation is going to be able to farm that land. Otherwise, the effort and the money required just doesn't really add up. And, you know, in my work with the Farmers Alliance, I've had friends who had to pick up and move their farms 2 or 3 times, pack up their high tunnels, pack up their greenhouses, and move shop because they just don't have that stable access to land. And it's really heartbreaking, and it means that you have to start all over again. Like, I've been farming for a decade, which sounds like a really long time, but that means I've only done this 10 times. It's like every year there's something new to learn. Every year you get better at farming and at doing climate smart farming because you learn how the land responds in a flood. You learn how the land responds in a drought. And so when we lose farmland, when we lose farmers, we're just losing all this like climate knowledge from that particular parcel of land that really takes generations and decades to build up. So
I love that you're using climate as your advocacy tool, right? To be a farmer. It's so great. Josh, I'm wondering, you know, when we last spoke, you didn't study agriculture, and unfortunately, and I'm so sorry, your parents passed away, and you were put in this position of taking over the farm and protecting it for those future generations. Can you share a little bit about that journey? It's really difficult.
Yeah, and I think I can also kind of attest to the impact of and the importance of protecting land for instance, a third-generation farmer such as myself, for similar reasons, but in a different context. We protected our farm farm is a 270-acre apple orchard, fruit and vegetable farm in the Hudson Valley. We do pick your own, have a CSA, very diverse production, split organic and eco certified fruit production. And we protected the land in 2012, and it was after a period where the farm had really struggled for a long time. My father was really committed to keeping it going, but his career was not on the farm.
Sure.
We needed new tractors, and the orchard needed to be replanted and, you know, desperately pruned. And so we actually had a need to raise capital to fund the equipment that we needed to actually get the farm kind of moving again and set it up for a new leg of growth and success. And on, you know, that was the context. And then on top of that, in 2009, we had and I know I didn't get to share this with Klaus, but I know he has had a similar thing. We had a barn fire and lost almost all of our equipment and our cold storage and structure. And so we were really in dire straits.
Sure.
And, you know, the importance for me of protecting the land was that the farm was originally over 1,000 acres when my grandfather started it. And I had seen my aunt's piece go fallow, and I'd seen my uncle's piece get sold for development, and land that I had grown up exploring on and you know, really had felt attachment to had, you know, turned into housing development. And so that was the context. And then we also needed money to actually keep the farm going.
Yeah.
And the state, the Purchase of Development Rights program was, you know, a solution that enabled us to invest for the future. And the, you know, to second Mary Claire's point about the just the how much investment regenerative farming takes.
Right.
You know, in our orchard, for instance, we, instead of using herbicide strips, as a matter of course, we do a lot of mulching. We actually have tree companies that chip the wood, you know, tree branches from the local town roads, and they dump wood chips on our farm, and we spread those under the trees. That in a, you know, to get that program started, we needed a row mulcher. It's a lot of labor to spread the wood chips, way cheaper to just spray herbicide. And you don't see the payoff immediately, but over time, you know, the last 4 years, 2 of the last 4 summers, we've had extreme droughts, you know, 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And we had blocks that, we were really struggling to irrigate the farm, and because of the wood chip mulching and the organic matter that we'd built up in the soil over many years, our trees, there was no stress. And we were actually amazed
exactly.
that there were other orchards were panicking because they didn't have enough water, and our trees were happy.
Stability, investment, being able to have that long-term vision and have folks help you. When a barn burns down, things like that. It's a community effort. Klaus, I want to turn to you because I think one of the reasons that farmland is often, goes into development is because farmers don't have a succession plan. They don't have a plan in place. And I'm hoping you can talk about, as someone who's been doing this a long time, what that succession plan looks like and why it's important to you to have that sort of built into your farming plan.
I'm probably somewhat unusual in that my son wants to take over the farm. We're actually at a point where there's a generational transfer taking place, and especially in the Hudson Valley. The original families that farmed that land when I was growing up are not farming it anymore. But there is a whole new group of farmers who want to become farmers, and it's such a hurdle to have to come up with millions of dollars of investment. So on our farm, like I said, my son is taking over, but I'm very proud of something else. We've taken on some young farmers and helped launch them, and we hope within the next 2 months we will be closing with a young couple that don't have any farm background, have no assets. He walked out of a Walgreens one day and said, "This is not my career."
I love it. I love it.
And Zach and Hannah are really great dairy farmers, and they are going to be able to do this because we've created a system where they cooperate with other farmers, where they don't have to have this enormous investment and where they can specialize in what they're good at. But if we don't put young people on the land and help them gain that knowledge, all farming is local. There's such a connection between a farmer and their land. I need to quote one of our neighbors. We are fortunate to live in an old order Mennonite community, which are very similar to Amish. And what he said was, "I can afford to lose the soil that's going down my streams, but my grandchildren can't." And that's a really different way. That's a very different way of looking at land and looking at a farm, because he's looking at it as a legacy that our future generations are going to farm. If we just look at it as an investment that we're trying to get as much money as we can out of, that's why we see 2 tons of soil being lost for every ton of corn, because this is a business proposition and investment. It's a very different thing than this is the home for our future generations.
All three of you have mentioned future generations, and I feel like you as farmers have such a responsibility. You're stewards of the land, you're business people, you're innovators and entrepreneurs. How do you handle these multiple responsibilities and burdens while also protecting your farmland? Mary Claire?
Well, it's exhausting. I mean, for me, it's the relationships, and that's what I focus on first and foremost. There's the relationship that I have with the land. There's how much the land and the plants and the animals teach me every single year. It's incredible. This year we have these herons that have taken up residence on our farm, and they're so beautiful, and I just feel like I'm learning about water and ecosystems from them. And then there's the people who work on the farm as well. And I think that when we talk about stability and we talk about investing in and supporting the next generation of farmers, we really also have to be talking about farm workers. Because if you're a young person interested in farming, what's the best way to learn? You go and work on a farm. But if you're working on a farm, you probably don't have healthcare, you don't have retirement savings, you're probably getting paid really poorly. None of us qualify for overtime. There's just no world where you can be working for that pay on a farm and also saving up the money that you need to start your own business. And so we're losing really skilled, really wise farm workers because you do this for 10 years and it's like, my body's exhausted, I'm broke, like, what am I supposed to do from here? I have all these skills, but, you know, people just go into other industries. And so I think the farmland affordability is a huge piece of it, but it's also just a matter of like wages and benefits for farm workers, because these are the people who
Absolutely.
have that knowledge, and I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Removing, the student loan debt, from, encouraging people to have health insurance, like all of these things are really needed. Josh, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. You have such a strong burden, but you also have a great, energy of protecting farmland.
I mean, I think Mary Claire, it's hard to add to what she said. For me, I don't have the benefit of lots of siblings who are involved. I am one of seven siblings, and the only one who really was interested in the farm, which is a blessing and a curse, because I don't have the help, but I also don't. I don't have to be business partners with six siblings,
Siblings
which
are
would be
difficult.
its own set of challenges. But for me, it's echoing Mary Claire. It's having a good team. So I didn't have the large family network to help me run this operation, so I had to find that through hiring the right people.
Yeah, and that community that you've built, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Klaus.
Our neighbors are what make our farm more successful and more resilient. And we talk a lot about productivity in American agriculture, but we don't talk about resilience enough. And it's not the same thing. We had a catastrophic fire in 2017. It burned down $1 million building. And that night, 200 of our neighbors were there. And the next morning, one of them said, "We've got this, you've got work to do." And we had a new barn standing a month later. Now that's that's resilience. But there's a different kind of resilience, and I've only got a minute left, but climate is changing. When I graduated from high school, the farming that was done at the Mason-Dixon line is what we are doing today in New York. And we're in upstate New York. That is a massive change. Our season now is at about 6 weeks longer than it was. Now that is causing stress on plants. It has closed windows for some of the crops that were grown traditionally, has created other opportunities. But we need to be able to adapt. Biodiversity is our real crop insurance. And I really have a problem with our government cropping subsidies and program, because we're using insurance to enable what I consider risky behavior on the land. And we really should be encouraging adaptation. We've got lots of opportunities now, even as far north as we are, for double cropping. We've got new crops that fit, and it's this biodiversity is what is making our farm stronger and more stable, and that's what's going to make the next generation able to farm here in the future.
Biodiversity is our crop insurance. That's the quote of the day. Thank you all so much. Please give the panel a round of applause. Beth is going to stay with me on stage, but thank you all so much for joining us. It's so wonderful to hear from your perspectives. Wonderful. In this next conversation, we're going to talk about why it makes sense from a business perspective to support the farmers who are doing this work and to offer climate-friendly food options. So again, we'll have a chance to hear from Beth from American Farmland Trust. We also have Kimberly Sunday, the Senior Director of Sustainability for Kellanova. Round of applause. Paul Lightfoot, who is the General Manager of Patagonia Provisions. And Dorothy Shaver, who is the Global Food Sustainability Director for Unilever. Another round of applause, please. So while they're getting settled, let me acknowledge some of our other partners who have helped support this week's events, including King Arthur Baking Company, Little Sesame, Nature's Find, Nature's Path, Nyman Ranch, Oatly, Parlor Coffee, Raw Foods, Ceremony, Simply, Strong Roots, and Stonyfield. Round of applause, please. So I'm going to start with a question for you all. It's so nice to see you all, by the way. Thank you for being here. My first question is, how are you all supporting your agricultural supply chains transition to be more climate smart? And then how hard is it to do that? Kimberly, do you want to go first?
I would love to. Good morning, everyone. I think that one of the things that we're really committed to doing at Kellanova is thinking about some of those more popular foods and brands that consumers know and love and trust, and really working behind the scenes to think about what are those things that we can do to make them better, right? We always say even better at Kellanova. And so we've just launched this pilot project with Agrovoltaics, one of our biggest customers, and we're working with them, our key wheat supplier, Bartlett, out of North Carolina, and then, of course, Arva to do some measurement, verification, and reporting for us. And the reason that that project is so important is that when you think about a cheese that you probably are never really thinking about the fact that it has such a small footprint, that all of the wheat that's grown for those cheeses that come from our Kerry manufacturing facility are coming from a very small 125-mile radius. You're probably not thinking about the fact that that wheat is also milled and then sent to our Kerry manufacturing facility, and you're not thinking about the fact that we're working with those farmers to implement those regenerative practices and then work with them to make sure that those farmers are also mentors for other farmers. So we're really thinking about how can we do better, and how can we do those things that consumers aren't necessarily asking for today, but that we want to give them.
You're building it in and creating those partnerships that are so necessary. Paul.
Yeah, so we're in business to save our home planet. That's the mission of Patagonia, and we make mostly apparel. So when we were learning about the environmental impacts of cotton, this goes back a while, we sort of fell in love with the idea of regenerative organic practices, which draw down carbon, take synthetic fertilizers, which are made from natural gas, out of our inputs of our cotton farms, and eventually decided that if we were serious about our mission, we needed to be in food as well.
Yeah.
So with Dr. Bronner's and the Rodale Institute, we stood up the Regenerative Organic Alliance, of which I'm now the board chair, and we decided that for all of our non-seafood food products, and seafood can't be organic certified, they're based on ingredients that are regenerative organic certified, which we think is the highest standard for environmental impact for food.
And you're really building that network of farmers and producers who can supply that and helping them make those transitions.
And you asked if it was hard. The answer is yes, it is hard. So, we can't with our standards call a co-packer and say, here's our recipes. We generally go directly to farmers, and we give them, forward purchase contracts guaranteeing a price and a volume over a long period, because otherwise it's just too much risk for them.
Right.
So it's hard, but it's the kind of hard that we think is easily worth it.
And it goes back to the stability that is necessary that we heard on the first panel. Dorothy.
Thank you for having me. So I'm at Unilever, which of course has big brands here in the U.S. such as Knorr, or Knorr, depending on how you say it, and Hellmann's. And we have two scaled programs here in the United States. One is in Iowa, which is the Practical Farmers of Iowa, which we actually created. And with that, we really said that, if we create a collaborative of farmers, we can work together with those farmers and our suppliers to really change the way that foods are grown in Iowa. And so we work with them and also with PepsiCo and ADM, so it's all about that collaboration together to grow soybeans for our Hellmann's mayonnaise together with the corn for Doritos. And we've been working with them for quite some time on a variety of different projects. And it's been going really well. And I'll now answer the question about is it hard?
Right.
And the reason why I answer it is because we really, at Unilever, we're really committed to really helping farmers go through the transition to regenerative agriculture. And I think the more that I'm learning about it, the more is that we'll forever be going through a transition, because we always have to change the way that we're farming in order to be more resilient to climate change, which is just becoming more and more and more unexpected. And so we were really proud of what we were doing with our soybeans. It's one of our champion projects, of course, as you can imagine. And last year they had a hard year, so they reversed some of their practices and went back to what they're comfortable with, as you can imagine. And the way that we found out is that we measure on the field. We measure impacts around climate, around biodiversity in a variety of different areas. And that's how we found out that the practices had been shifted. And I think the reason why it's hard is a few things. One is that, then you go back to the business, which I happen to work for a large business, and these numbers are critical to get to our climate transition action plan, right? Regenerative agriculture practices are critical to that. And we published a new one this year, and it's very much in there. And then you go back to the business, and some of those numbers have shifted, and they will continue to shift. So what do you then do about reporting, and how do you really talk about that? And I think this goes into the brand part of it, is that numbers and logos and checkboxes and certifications give people information, but it doesn't change the tides of what consumers feel about your products. When we start to talk about stories and farmers, and if I were to tell people that story, they might say, that's so interesting. I didn't even actually connect my Hellmann's mayonnaise with a farmer, right? And I think, and a farmer in America. And I think when we start to humanize these stories instead of put these numbers on there, that's when we'll drive change through our brands. And that's when people will say, oh, food is actually so emotional. And so that's when we'll really have the competitive advantage. So I think those are the things that we really try to look at from the whole chain in relation to how do we start to tell those stories. And I'll just tell one quick story. It didn't happen in the US, but I like it anyway. So in Italy, we're growing our rice following regenerative practices. And it's one of the rare circumstances in Unilever where the supply chain isn't segregated. So all of our rice for our Italy risotto packets, Knorr, is from this one farm. And so we wanted to do a program. So we put grannies on the farm about regeneration of old dishes, because a lot of Gen Z people don't like the Knorr brand. They think it's like for their grandmas. And we put them on the field together with a pop band and created this really cool social media campaign. And we measured the perception of the brand, and it significantly shifted the perception of how Gen Z feels about our products. And if we really want to make this change, farmers need to love the way that they farm and feel confident that it's going to help them be resilient to climate change. And consumers need to love those foods. And we need to work together on that whole system, and they sit all together. So it's really imperative for a business to see it as profitable, to talk about it to consumers in the right way, in an emotional way that really does change the way they feel about your food, and to make sure that farmers feel well supported by having a collaboration.
Absolutely. Please. And, Beth, Dorothy was so good at bringing up what AFT does so well, which is make it farmer-centered, people-centered, humanizing these issues, because it's very hard for, I think, all of us as eaters to understand what farmers go through. Can you talk a little bit about that and why AFT is so focused on the farmer?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, we're not going to have any food or fiber or fuel if we don't have farmers out there. It's as basic as that. And so what we do a lot is we work directly with some farmers and working with various corporations in a whole variety of ways to help bring that the people factor to the whole, to the value chain. So one thing that American Farmland Trust does is we work with farmers and we train them on soil health. What is soil health? Why is it so important? How can you improve it? What practices can a farmer adopt that will improve the productivity and the soil health of their land, which, relevant for this week, you're sequestering carbon, you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions a lot of the time and adopting those practices. We also train other ag practitioners who work directly with farmers. It could be fertilizer or seed salespeople, and we train them on soil health as well. One thing that we haven't spoken about today is a lot of farming, especially in the Midwest, but really about across the country, a lot of farmers are using rented land. Right. So many own their own land, but they also work much more land than that, and it's land that they rent. And if you don't own the land or you don't have a really long-term contract, first of all, there's less incentive to really invest in what you're doing on that land for the long term. So we work with non-operating landowners, and many non-operating landowners happen to be women. And so we have programs where we are building these peer-to-peer networks of women, non-operating landowners, and we train them on what's going on in their supply chain. How do you talk to the banker? How do you talk to the insurance person? How do you talk to the seed salesperson? How do you talk to the farmer who's renting your land and farming your land, and sort of understanding a lot of the risk that they take on? And one of the end results is that you see a lot of these women are they're having more conversations with the farmer who's renting their land, and they're sharing in some of the risk. And they're saying, you know what, I would really love for you to be planting cover crops here, and I will, share some of the costs, some of the risk. And we've really seen a lot of benefit coming from that. We also we have a program called U.S. Farmed, which is a certification program, excuse me, that is for companies that can certify that 95% or more of their agricultural raw materials are coming from, are being grown right here in the United States. I think being able to sort of come at the issue from so many different directions and so many different people really helps to make a much stronger partnership with corporations as well as farmers, and for a much more sustainable and climate-friendly ecosystem.
No, yeah, I mean, those partnerships are key. We've heard it from the other three panelists for sure. The de-risking for farmers is essential. What I want to talk about a little bit now is how we story tell this to eaters, to consumers, to the people purchasing these products. And Kimberly, you talked about Cheez-Its, and it's like such a familiar thing for most people. I mean, I grew up eating them. Can you talk about, you know, using that as sort of the icon for regenerative farming?
I mean, I think Dorothy did such a nice job of talking about this when she was saying that we really have to make it approachable, right? I think we can't talk about it in terms of regenerative agriculture. We have to tell consumers and shoppers that we're supporting you as farmers. We have to really bring it down when we're at the store level, you know, to a food line shopper, for instance, to say we're supporting North Carolina farmers. We have to really make it approachable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that sometimes, you know, the more technical people in the audience, or myself included, sometimes forget. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we really need to make sure that we're doing a really good job of is personalizing, because consumers care about where their foods come from. Investors certainly ask us a lot of questions about, you know, tell me more about these practices. Where is the food coming from? Who are you working with to help, you know, de-risk these practices? Where are these technical advisors coming from? And making sure that we're doing that in a way that really does a good job. So, you know, we are always going to augment things with video, with QR codes, and of course, transparency is a big part of our agenda.
Yeah.
So for our more scrutinous consumers, it's always making sure that we have the data to really help make sure it's public facing, to make sure there's transparency attached to it, and to make sure it feels approachable for consumers who are on the other side of the value chain, who are maybe less technical and less, you know, familiar.
Right. Paul, I think Patagonia and Patagonia Provisions does such a great job at storytelling, but how do you, it's often very difficult to translate into little sound bites or little films or buzzwords that consumers can understand. So when they're making decisions at the grocery store, they want to purchase, you know, the better, the good products.
So there's very little storytelling you can do as someone walks down the aisle in a supermarket. Patagonia has a really trusted brand. So in many ways, it's the way that the product just appears with the P6 mountain range logo. That said, once a customer is activated with the product and they engage with the company, then we can do more long-form storytelling. Patagonia considers itself a storytelling company, and always has, but our stories sometimes diverge from what you might expect. Like, we're not always trying to tell the cheerful story. I'm here to tell you the story that I think the way we grow food today may prevent humans from growing food tomorrow.
Right.
That most of the farmland in the U.S. is growing crops with synthetic fertilizer made from natural gas. That's not that fun of a story to tell, but we view our role in the world because of our mission to tell that story.
You have
so
to.
It has to be a product that people love first, and then once they fall in love with the product because of its taste, perhaps because of its nutrition, then we get to the second, third, or fourth attributes, which are about environmental impact.
None of this works if it doesn't taste good, right?
It's exactly right, yeah.
Right. Dorothy, Kimberly brought up this idea of transparency. I've been hearing a lot about really honesty and bluntness over the last few days. You've always been very transparent about what Unilever does, but that's very difficult. And I wonder for you, as somebody who has to tell these stories constantly through Stone Soup and other things, how you handle that sort of like the negative part of it.
I think it's just really important to just tell the truth and I think it's also important to make it feel like a lesson for people, because we don't have time for every single company to make the same mistakes and then fix them. So actually, if you make a mistake, it's up to you to actually tell what you did and how you fixed it, so then the other company can skip that step. So that's really part of who I would like to be as a human. And sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes I get off a stage to be really candid with you, and I think, oh shoot, I hope nobody soundbited me. But I just think it's really important for us to feel like we're really drivers of change. So to share our tips and tricks and what worked and what didn't work. And I do want to share something really quick that didn't work, actually, when it comes to consumer facing. And I think it's really something that's really quite interesting, because we have this little pot of noodles that we sell in the UK, and the demographic is really kind of teenagers, right? Eating it on the go, We've made the nutritional value better. I'm a dietitian by background, so I pay attention to that a lot. And then we put it into a compostable pack. I'm talking 14 to 15-year-olds who eat noodles out of a thing, right? And then we didn't do any we didn't talk about it at all, and I'm afraid that we didn't do much consumer insights. And then the pack wasn't as great, because it kind of fell apart if you left the water in there for too long. But you're a teenager, right? And you're probably going to leave the water in there for too long. And I'm not sure what we think is the opportunity for them to bury it either, right? I mean, it seems like a real stretch. So anyway, we did that, and then we're like, well, that doesn't work. And I think it's so important for us to be like, it actually needs to be a long journey of consumer insights, followed by doing something that makes sense, followed by making sure that there's marketing spend behind it, so that we can explain what we've done, so that you make it a real proposition. Because a lot of the time, it's the SKU of the product in your portfolio that isn't the highest volume one, right? But in order for us to make this work, we need to make the best products the highest volume ones, right? So then we need to make sure there's marketing spend behind it. So I told you that story because it's so important to make sure that you just don't throw out everything because of one of those experiences. And at Unilever, we're not. I mean, we tried that out. It didn't go that well. We need to shift it. We need to change it, and we will sharpen it. But it's so important to stick with it and make sure that you really support it by a marketing campaign.
You have to tell the whole story.
You have to tell the whole story, or else it's just annoying.
Yeah, it's really annoying. Beth, I want to give you the final 30 seconds. What advice do you have for companies who are listening, you know, how they can become part of the solution instead of part of the problem?
I think a lot of it is be willing to work with your supply chain. And you may not have enough procurement or operations staff to do it, but then work with organizations like American Farmland Trust, and we will help be sort of your tendrils to get closer to the farmer and to try and drive this behavior change.
Partner with AFT, companies listening. Round of applause for this panel. I'm so grateful to all of you. From here, we're going to turn to a fireside chat about corporate responsibility and conservation. So, and as these panelists leave, I get to welcome John Piatti of American Farmland Trust back to the stage. And joining him in this conversation is Miranda Kaiser, the president of the Rockefeller Family Fund. Give them a round of applause, everyone.
Getting adjusted here. Nice to be here.
It's
the
nice
lights
to be
are bright.
I was just going to say, it's really bright. Oh.
And then they put the mic right up in front of you like this. Miranda, your family, the Rockefeller family, has a long and incredibly impressive history of philanthropic and engagement activities that have really helped change the world in very positive ways. When we think of education, science, land conservation, environmental causes, and the like. So it's been profound. And but today we want to talk about a couple of pieces of that. One, a little later, I want to return to a small but I think very significant part of that, which is the fact that your grandmother was the lead founder of American Farmland Trust, and then you stepped up a few decades later and chaired our board. So I want to come back to that. But I want to begin by something that has really been a priority for you and other members of your family recently, which is holding to account Exxon Mobile for what they knew and didn't say and didn't do about climate change. So talk about your family's involvement in this space and how it's unfolded.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for those kind words and for giving me this opportunity, because this is a story that I am sure people do not understand well enough, and it is so important. And my family got involved actually under my brother's leadership at the Rockefeller Family Fund back in 2015 and before. But I really want to make this story clear to all of you about what Exxon Mobile has done over the years. So, and it's tragic and it's horrifying, and it comes around to solutions. So it's not all dark. But back in the 70s and before, Exxon Mobile had some of the premier scientists in the world working for them. They were doing modeling of all sorts of things that was as good as what NASA was doing. And they were really committed. There were really good people there who were trying to understand the science around climate and everything else. This was before really understanding climate change. And then around in 1977, actually when President Carter first told the American public about climate change, inside Exxon, they also started to understand what was happening. And I have notes because I want you to hear these quotes. This is not just me making this up. These are internal documents from Exxon that the Rockefeller Family Fund, under my brother's leadership, helped uncover. In 1977, one of their senior scientists, James Black, wrote to the management that current opinion overwhelmingly favors attributing atmospheric CO2 increase to fossil fuel combustion. So he was making the tie. They got it. A year later, Black warned that present thinking holds that man has a time window of 5 to 10 years before the need for hard decisions regarding changes in energy strategies might become critical. So that was circulating in Exxon. Exxon is a micromanaging company. It's not like people don't know what is going on. And then they started to really figure out, like, this could be a problem for us, right? This is really tying back to our bread and butter, our industry. In 1980, there was a memo circulated in Exxon that said that the entire issue of climate change is significant to Exxon since future public decisions aimed at controlling the buildup of atmospheric CO2 could impose limits on fossil fuel combustion. Indeed, they noted that the question of global climate change was, quote, significant to all humanity. But they continued to fund this science, and they outfitted a tanker to measure carbon dioxide and everything else. But finally, it got to a point where one of the directors of their science labs stated in 1981 that by 2030, it was, quote, distinctly possible that cumulative carbon emissions could eventually, quote, produce effects which will indeed be catastrophic, parentheses, at least for a substantial fraction of the Earth's population. At that point, Exxon started laying off their scientists. They started funding bunk scientists, or real scientists that they could influence, to start talking about the uncertainties in the field. They formed commissions and funded research to argue that climate science was unsettled. They attacked officials in the US government and on UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, interfering with their work and trying to undermine it in the public eye. They formed a coalition of companies that pledged to launch a big communications effort. And by the way, most of those people were the same people that worked for the tobacco companies. They just went back to all of the same people, the lobbyists, the scientists, to do this. And that commission that had Exxon and some of the other fossil fuel companies and things stated in an internal memo that victory will be achieved when average citizens, quote, understand, parentheses, recognize, uncertainties in climate science, and when recognition of uncertainty becomes part of the, quote, conventional wisdom. So they knew, they got it, they understood it at all levels, and they had a range of choices, right? They could have buried the information and gone on. They could have come forward and said, well, we know this, but too bad our business model is something different. But they didn't do any of that. They put millions of dollars into confusing the public. And that was almost 50 years ago. Think where we would be now if 50 years ago they had not done that and they had gotten out of the way. And I also want to say that in addition to, standing in the way of the global climate treaties and all of their things, most of this happened under the leadership of Lee Raymond, who was there at the time. When he retired in 2005, for all of this good work, his retirement package was valued at $400 million. So it's pretty unconscionable, I have to say. But the good news, and I promised I would bring it back to good news.
Thank you.
Is that we have the science now, right? We have the technology. This is what John Kerry talked about, what people have been talking about. We have the will, we have the global awareness. We just need these guys to get out of the way.
Hear, hear. So where's it headed? What's the next step? What is your family pushing for? What do you hope are the outcomes?
Well, you know, we're pushing for transparency. We're pushing for them to come forward and be accountable. We're not making any progress in that. There is still greenwashing, there's obfuscation, there's, you know, now they're investing in, carbon capture and storage, which is not supported. So, of course, I would love to think this is a company that descended from Standard Oil, right? From my family's legacy. I would love to think that they would get on board and say, okay, great, let's throw in. I've given up that hope. So instead, what we're doing is we're putting a lot of energy in trying to figure out attribution science is part of it, to figure out exactly, you know, how these current tragedies of the weather events are caused by the carbon emissions, and attribute to the companies their fair share of what's going on. And that is a piece of the litigation strategy. We obviously don't bring cases against Exxon Mobile and others. We don't have that capacity, and that's not legal. But we do point out to attorney generals and others what they might want to be paying attention to, where we think there have been problems, and then we support the science that goes into the cases to show who is responsible for what and how they could potentially be held accountable. So the hope is that they will pay damages, that they will come clean about what they've done, and so if they won't voluntarily be part of the solution, at least punitively, they might be part of the solution if we can get them to pay for mitigation strategies now. But I think more importantly, and the reason I'm so glad to have this chance to tell this story, and I want this to get out there, is that we have to deprive them of their social license. They have to stop influencing our politicians. And until public sentiment really turns them into pariahs, that's not going to happen.
Hear, hear. Thank you for your efforts.
You're welcome.
Thanks for what you and I know you've picked up your brother David's legacy here, and the family is all behind it, and it's so important. So thank you. Thank you. As a citizen of this planet, we all need to thank you. But I want to pivot, because I can't have you here and not give you a chance to talk about American Farmland Trust and to talk about your grandmother. With Secretary Kerry, he mentioned that his cousin, Fred Winthrop, was one of the founders of AFT. That's true. He was one of the people who your grandmother, Peggy Rockefeller, recruited. And, we can talk about emission reduction. That's important. But as I said in my opening remarks, we also need to think about what we can do with natural solutions. And I don't think your grandmother envisioned AFT 40-some-odd years ago in necessarily addressing climate. Maybe she would have if Exxon had been telling her she should have. But she didn't do that. But she was focused on soil health. She was focused on farmland protection. And she created something that has really made a difference on the climate front since then. Tell us a little bit about how all that happened. What can you speak to?
Well, I was not intimately involved in it, so most of what I know is from knowing her later in her life and when I was in my 20s. But Granny just loved the outdoors. She loved open space. She also helped start Maine Coast Heritage Trust. She really saw the value in open land. In fact, on their honeymoon, my grandparents went to the Jackson Hole area and went on a camping trip, and she shot a bear. So she was very into being out there in the nature and doing things, being hands-on. But I think she also really understood the value of, good food, clean air, healthy lands. She believed very much in the people who were working the lands and the communities, and she was always right in there rolling up her sleeves. She learned how to artificially inseminate her own cattle. She drove her tractor. There was this bridge up in Columbia County where she had a farm that she kept driving her tractor over, and they kept saying, Mrs. R., you can't drive your tractor over that. It's twice the weight of the bridge will take. And she said, it's okay, I go twice as fast. So that's how she was.
And you picked up the legacy a couple of decades later, came on to AFT's board, then became our board chair at one point, before my time, sadly. I never had the chance of overlapping with you. But what was your reason to get involved? How did you see the connection between environmental issues and ag issues?
At that point, it was a pretty clear connection, I think, to most people, that we had to steward the land well to make a difference in terms of all of the problems with climate change. But I also really saw it as an issue that had the potential to be bipartisan. You know, healthy food and a healthy environment, it all ties back to our human health, and that cannot be a political issue. And I so appreciated how AFT worked with all sides to try and find solutions. That mattered an enormous amount to me. But I also knew that there were really strong forces in big ag that were playing out in the government and in entrenched interests. And it was important to me that there was a champion there for the small farmers and for finding a way to do agriculture in the right way that was helping all of us. And that's what I saw AFT doing, and it was really my passion for many years.
And you're also a little bit of a rancher on the side. You're like your grandmother. You come to this on both the organizational side, but also you get your hands dirty.
I'm leaving Friday to go to Montana to chase cows out of the mountains on a horse. It's awesome. Yes, I love it.
That's great. That's more what we need. I mean, at American Farmland Trust, we do a lot of high-level policy work, but if we weren't getting our hands dirty, if we weren't working directly with farmers, we wouldn't have the knowledge, and we also wouldn't have the credibility to help move something broadly forward. So it's great that to recognize both the need for both sides of that and how it's connected.
And it's the farmers and the ranchers who will be the first to know if there's a new fungus in the soil. They will be the first to tell you when there's a new pest in the area.
Yep.
You know, we can't litigate and mandate and control these things from a national level. You have to have the people on the ground who know what's going on, and they care more than anyone.
Yeah, they really do. I've worked with farmers professionally pretty much my whole career, close to 40 years. I have, with one or two exceptions of the real grumpy ones, and farmers can be grumpy, I've never found a farmer who denies climate change. And that might surprise some of you because you think of all these conservative farmers. There are a lot of people in rural America who deny climate change, but they're not farmers. They may be worried about how the government's going to use climate change to tell them what to do, but they recognize what's happening. They have to. They live with their land.
Yeah, and with the consequences.
Exactly, exactly. I'd love, I've heard some of them, but the crowd here hasn't. Tell us a granny story or two. There's some good ones.
There are some great granny stories. Well, I'll tell you one that I think actually is a nice lesson for all of us. When Granny cared about something, she wanted everyone involved. And we know how important this issue is, and we need to pull in everyone at every level and talk to them about what needs to be done. Granny had a particular window on how she could do this. So she found out that my grandfather, her husband, was going to Russia to meet with Gorbachev at the time. But she knew that Gorbachev's wife also bred cattle. So she sent with Grandpa a tank of bull semen and had him present it to Gorbachev through interpreters having to say, Mr. Gorbachev, my wife is sending your wife this semen. And if she was brave enough to do that, and he was brave enough, I mean, she mostly got what she wanted, but he was also very brave to do it. You know, I think we all have to be out there trying to convince everyone of what we know.
Absolutely. And you and your family have really lived that to heart, and particularly with what you're doing with Exxon Mobile and trying to make sure people understand what's out there and that we all need to rally behind that, and we have to hold businesses accountable.
Yeah, and it's not just Exxon, obviously. It is corporations generally. And I'll just tell a quick grandpa story because he was probably 95 when one time I went with him to a Chase banking meeting. It was of the private bankers. It was very small. It was like 40 people or something, and it was when Jamie Dimon had just taken over. And they had speech after speech about how they were going to maximize profits and how they were going to, you know, get into new areas and do all of this stuff. And at the end, they asked him if he would like to make remarks. And I was so impressed by his bravery because he knew this was not going to be popular, but he got up there at 95 and he said, it's great to make money, but what's really important is that we are good citizens. We have all of this power and we need to give back. And you should have seen, it was like stone-faced. It was not well received, but he was also determined to give that message. And it is a part of the solution. You know, it's wonderful that Unilever and some of these corporations are on board, but there are many more that we need to be talking to, and we need to, again, it's a piece of the Exxon story. If they can be made into social pariahs, they're one of the biggest companies in the world, maybe the rest of these companies will start paying more attention.
We all need to be good citizens.
Right.
Says it all.
Right.
If we all just live by that, what a different world this would be.
Yeah, and take care of each other.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John and Miranda. That was awesome. Talk about honesty and radical transparency. I loved it. And I wish I had known Miranda's grandparents. They sound super cool. Like badasses, sorry, but yeah, I think it's great. So I am delighted for this next conversation. We're going to dive into agrovoltaics and talk about how they can serve as a cross-sector solution to the climate crisis. This is a topic I am just digging into. It's something that it's been on my radar for a long time. I'm nerding out about it, so I'm really, really thrilled for this conversation. Let me introduce our panelists. We have Miles Braxton, the co-founder and CEO of Agrovoltaics Sustainable Energy. Round of applause. Jesse Robertson Dubois, the Director of Sustainable Solar Development with Blue Wave. And we have Ethan Winter, the National Smart Solar Director at American Farmland Trust. Nice to see you. So Ethan, I have to start with you because I think we need to break this down a little bit and talk about how renewable energy can help us build resilience in our agriculture systems. It's kind of obvious, but I think it deserves to be broken down a little.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having us. We heard Secretary Kerry talk earlier about Solar Plus. What we're going to be talking about is Solar Plus Plus Plus, the integration of agriculture in the renewable energy transition, and the necessary aspects of that. A lot of ways, necessity is the mother of invention, and what we have in this country are two very interesting forces coming together. We have really challenging conditions for farming. Climate change is making farming harder. We have a demographic cliff for a lot of producers. And we heard from Klaus earlier today talking about transitioning his farm to the next generation and having something really valuable to give to the next generation. We also have an accelerating energy transition that is going to be fundamentally focused on solar. Solar will be a central pillar of decarbonization in this country, and it is land intensive. Solar requires 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. We're going to need thousands and thousands and thousands of megawatts to decarbonize. And as it turns out, the best land for solar tends to be the best land for growing food. So what we're trying to figure out with this concept of agrovoltaics is how can we do this together in a way that builds agricultural resilience, that builds pathways for new farmers, and doesn't create a binary trade-off between energy and food.
So agrovoltaics, define it.
That's a great question. AFT has a very farmer-centric focus on what agrovoltaics is. It's the intentional design and co-location of solar energy generation and farming, agricultural production, on the same piece of land for the life of the project. And importantly for AFT, there needs to be an agricultural product in that process.
Right.
So there's also something that is emerging, which is more of an ecological dual use. We call that ecovoltaics. So you've learned two new words today, agrovoltaics and ecovoltaics. And think of those as being part of this dual use approach, a multi-benefit approach to solar, so that solar is doing more than just generating electrons.
Right.
It's actually providing multi-benefits for farming and farming communities.
And this is a part of American Farmland Trust's smart solar principles, right?
We've developed a set of principles to help guide this work.
Yeah.
Because we know that if we don't do this right, this transition to solar will be potentially highly disruptive to rural communities.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if we get this right, it will be really beneficial. and necessary. So our principles are first to take pressure off the land that's already under pressure. And we heard from John and others earlier today about how much farmland we're losing. If thousands of acres, potentially millions of acres of land are being converted to solar without an agricultural aspect, we're losing that potential food security.
Yeah.
Secondly is providing soil health principles in everything we do around solar. So thinking about regenerative practices, bringing that into the essence of what solar development is all about.
Yeah.
We had a recent conference where we did a soil health 101 for the solar industry. This is not dirt. Sometimes it's called
Right,
dirt in the industry, right? I know that would be very offensive to people in this room to hear that people are calling this dirt. It is soil, it is a living organism, and we're trying to bring those principles in. So Agrovoltaics builds off of that. And then the fourth principle is farm viability. And in fact, that's really the mantle for all of this, is making sure that this energy transition fundamentally distributes benefits equitably to farmers, especially small and mid-sized producers who need to be at the table in this transition.
I love the intentionality of it, and I love the silo breaking that's happening. It's really cool that energy, I mean, because this doesn't happen, energy and farming folks talking together. So thank you for explaining all that. Jesse, I want to turn to you and talk about how we can effectively integrate effectively integrate agrovoltaics into farming systems to boost renewable energy production without compromising agricultural land.
Thank you, Danny. It really all comes down to the intentionality. Ethan described it as intentional design. And what we're doing at Blue Wave is really looking at every single one of our solar sites as a potential dual-use site or a triple-use site. What can we do there in terms of managing the design, managing the soil stewardship during construction, and then managing the operations and maintenance to make sure that that land continues to be productive. But it didn't really start there, right? Figuring out how to do intentional design, ultimately you have to start with a kernel of trying to do something different. And for me personally, I didn't come from a solar development background. I was a farmer. My first job out of college was with American Farmland Trust. I've gone back and forth between farmland protection policy work and agriculture. And for me, it was just driving by solar arrays back in the mid-2010s as Massachusetts was starting to do the first big build-out of solar. And just looking through the fence and noticing that the grass was greening up earlier in the springtime underneath the panels and then staying green later in the fall. And it was that, sort of like the farmer looking and saying, this is a microclimate.
Yeah.
And at its core, agriculture is about managing microecosystems, microclimates. And so what can you do? We raise sheep, we raise vegetables, we had cattle. It was like, look, the cattle aren't going to work in there, right? These are conventional systems. But we could definitely graze sheep in there. We could definitely graze some of the crops in there. And so it wasn't unique to me, right?
Sure.
Shepherds all over the country have started doing this.
Yeah.
There's, at this point now, over 100,000 acres of solar land that's being actively grazed with sheep. The American Solar Grazing Association was formed several years back. It's a farmer-led group of folks who are like, we can do this. Let us inside the fence. Let us figure this out. Let us help you do it better. To go the next step, you start spacing those panels out. Well, now you're talking about different wind loads for the engineering. You're talking about going higher so you can fit cattle underneath the systems. But we're doing that. We built 4 projects last year that are all agrivoltaic. We have beef cattle out there grazing underneath the panels right now. They're not breaking anything. They can scratch on the posts. We put the panels up high enough, they can go right underneath it. It takes knowing how good regenerative agriculture works, right? You don't necessarily need to have all the panels be 15 feet in the air. If you have a rotating tracker system, you can lock it in horizontal for a portion of the array where the cattle are rotating through. All of a sudden now you've managed to save a lot of excess steel, saving all of the resources involved, but you're incentivizing that type of regenerative agriculture. And you're working with a farmer to help them do a better job on their farm. We're actually working with a dairy farm in central New York where they're looking at this as a benefit to their farming operation because the cattle are going to have shade during the summer months. If you're dairy farming, it's all about what your productivity is per cow, and it's about your cow comfort and your cow health because comfort and health ultimately drive their ability to produce milk. That shade is going to be a game changer for them.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, which I love, is a lot of experimentation and trial and error, and I love that. And it gives farmers an opportunity to learn things that they didn't know about, and for for all of you at AFT to learn things that you didn't know about. So it's very cool. Miles, if I can turn to you, I want to talk about how agrovoltaics are impacting rural communities, especially as it relates to land access and that next generation of farmers that we've been talking about all morning.
I think it's a really amazing opportunity that we have with agrovoltaics to open up more land access and more land opportunity for new farmers. Like you said, a lot of these systems are going in rural communities where land access is needed. You know, farmers are looking for land, and also, you know, we heard in previous panels, not only looking for land, but paying and renting for land itself themselves, right? This is a unique opportunity where, you know, these are $1 million systems that we're able to provide financing to. So, you know, in addition to that, what's paying a tenant farmer, you know, over a 30-year contract to farm at that site versus them having to pay, you know, on a rent basis year by year, and looking for other opportunities, you know, as they come up. And then I think, you know, additionally, with the general opportunity, you know, we're not only keeping farms farming, but we also are opening up, like Jesse said, regenerative agricultural practices to new farms that may not have had that before. So now with these additional, this additional income from dual revenue streams from both agriculture and sometimes solar lease payments, you know, based on kind of the financeability of the systems, how those were financed. Now they're able to reinvest back into their regenerative agriculture practices. You know, that, you know, organic matter that, you know, is going to boost their yields over the next 2 years that they've had in the plan for the last 3 years that they, you know, haven't been able to afford. Now they're able to afford that with, you know, through agrovoltaics. You know, so at Oakavate, we talk to a lot of, you know, soy and corn farmers, which is not necessarily the, you know, best crops that work with the designs of agrovoltaics, well, at least corn, maybe not. Sweet corn does pretty well, but standard corn, not so much. But we're seeing that, okay, you know, maybe this doesn't work, you know, as is, but now if we introduce a crop rotation with your soybeans, and actually, you know, look at this from a standpoint of we want to help you enrich the soil and boost your yields over a long-term period. Now it's something that's attractive, not just financially, but generationally for just being stewards to the land. So I think there's so many opportunities to bring more stewards to help, you know, create these regenerative practices and push
so many
that forward.
opportunities, right? Can you talk about the role of public-private partnerships in this?
Yeah, I think that's really important. In order to deploy these systems, we're going to continue to need catalytic capital, impact capital, but also partnerships with you know, public utilities, with town commissions who are now putting together solar ordinances. They need to understand the benefits of agrovoltaics and the benefits of dual use systems. A lot of towns, municipalities have put this, you know, kind of red bad mark on solar. Okay, we're just not going to do it. We have a moratorium. You know, that's an easy way to go about it. Why not look at incentivizing solar to be developed with agriculture in mind if the main concern is this is tearing up our agricultural integrity? American Farmland Trust has an amazing statistic that in order to hit the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act for solar procurement, we need, or 83% of future solar is going to go on farmland. We need to de-risk that because these projects are getting canceled too, and we need solar energy. So we need to continue to accelerate the deployment, and that looks like partnering, educating a lot of these municipalities who have this one idea of a solar project. That's not what our solar projects look like. That's not what Blue Wave solar projects look like. We're starting from a farmer-first perspective and building this project around what they want to do, their plan for the future of their farm.
That's so important to always put farmers first. This is for all of you, and Miles touched on it. Let's talk about the barriers to this and what is keeping this from scaling up and out in different ways.
Yeah, I guess I'd say we're in this policy limbo with agrivoltaics at this point. And it's really, I just want to drive home how important it is to have policy to help define what agrivoltaics is and to recognize and legitimize it.
Yeah.
Massachusetts has really been one of the leaders, and now it's being followed by New Jersey and New York with state programs to try to, A, incentivize some of the additional costs for engineering, for extra height, extra width, higher wind loads, but also just at a very foundational level, defining what it means.
Yeah.
It gives you a legitimacy when you're talking with that local zoning board and saying like, hey, we want to do this differently. They say, oh, come on, that's just greenwash. Well, if you have a set of rules that defines it, you actually have a starting point. The Blue Wave and several other solar developers have been working on starting a new organization, Solar and Farming Association, to work in partnership with the American Solar Grazing Association as a farmer-led organization. What ASGA has done for solar grazing has been amazing, but we really need to bring a larger effort to push for a federal definition, both to help legitimize this, but then also importantly for the farmers to make sure that they remain eligible for USDA programs. Right now, somebody farming in a solar array may not be eligible for conservation programs because it's not a farm.
Yeah.
It's a solar array. And so that kind of policy structure at the state level and the federal level is just absolutely critical.
Ethan, can you weigh in on that policy need?
And Jesse nailed it. We're really on the cusp of some really big stuff here.
Yeah.
And here we are at Climate Week. This may be the one session on agrivoltaics here in New York. This is going to be a major theme in the future. So those of you who are here, remember this day. It's a big deal. Just in the past year, we have 2 bipartisan bills that have been introduced in the U.S. Senate around agrivoltaics. You now have Secretary Granholm from DOE talking about agrivoltaics, Chuck Grassley talking about agrivoltaics.
I love it.
This is interesting, right? And you have land-grant universities across the country, from UC Davis to Cornell to Rutgers, who are developing these interdisciplinary sustainable solar programs because they are getting ahead of this.
Yeah.
And we're doing everything we can at AFT to be connected into those efforts. And policy will be key. And there's a research feedback loop, right, where we need to have applied research, looking at field trials, what works, also social science, to make sure that we're understanding how farmer adoption works. And I think there's an interesting analogy to the regenerative agriculture movement, where you started with early adopters and good science, and you tweak the policy, and you go back to the farmers, and you keep reiterating this. And we're at the beginning of that cycle now. There's about 10 states across the country that have either developed some kind of incentive or have an R&D program for agrivoltaics that did not exist 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's how
really
new this is.
exciting time.
States to keep an eye out on. You mentioned Massachusetts. New Jersey is about to unveil a 200 megawatt dual use pilot program in coordination with Rutgers and AFT and other partners. New York has a $5 million R&D program that they launched this summer after much work and cajoling, because a lot of states look to New York for leadership on climate policy. That's why we're here. So stay tuned for New York, but you have other states as well that are looking at this. And it's going to be really interesting to see how industry responds. One thing I'll just mention, at the major solar conference in Anaheim 2 weeks ago, RE+, there was quite a lot of programming around agrivoltaics.
Yeah.
3 years ago, there was basically none. So that's how quickly this is taking a foothold with the industry. At RE+, the Department of Energy announced a cattle solar prize, $8 million prize for who can come up with the most integrated solutions for cattle and large-scale solar.
So cool.
The other thing that happened at RE+ was a report from the Solar Energy Industries Association and their research arm, which is called SI2. They did a survey. They surveyed farmers, utilities, and solar developers. And what they found was a really interesting insight into what's about to happen. 70% of farmers said they would be interested in doing solar with the condition that they could do dual use. So that was a major caveat.
Yeah.
80% of the developers in that survey said, we expect to be integrating dual use into our future portfolios.
Nice.
Goes back to what Jesse said. What's that definition? This is more than sprinkling some black-eyed Susans in the corner. Right? We're talking about equipment and farmers and soil health protocols being built into the business models of these projects going forward. But that's what's about to happen.
Sure. I need to add 30 seconds on the clock because I want you to all give a call to action. So Jesse, I'd like you to go first. How do we get others involved in this sector? What's your call to action to people watching, people listening?
I'm going to sneak two in there. I already mentioned SAFA, solar and farming. But go to local planning meetings and just raise the question, what if we could do it better?
Yeah.
What if this isn't just a simple NIMBY, I don't want to look at it? What if the solar you can't see is probably not good solar. Let's have solar we can see that's better.
Awesome. Ethan.
Boy, so many things. I would say support and invest in farmer technical assistance. Those of you who are working with foundations and with the philanthropies, this is going to be a big bottleneck very quickly. If this thing lights like we think it's going to, we need farmer support systems.
Amazing. Miles, you get the last word.
Yeah. Invest in the doers. Invest in the folks that are implementing this and making it happen. Doing the research on the front lines and then taking that research and bringing it to commercialization. I think it's so important that we continue to just bring in more capital to allow for this. All the folks that are now investing in solar, the Googles, Microsofts of the world, they need to look at this from a lens of, is our investment at risk and of removing farmland? And looking at, okay, how do we also invest in, not only other technologies, but agrivoltaics as a part of our portfolio as well, and really being stewards to the land. So that's my call to
great.
action.
I love invest in the doers, invest in the farmers. Round of applause for this panel, please. Thank you all so much. That was great. We have heard some really exciting solutions this morning that will help us transform our food and agriculture systems, but we know that no single organization and no single sector can do this alone. We just heard that. So that's why I'm excited to turn to our next conversation on the power of partnerships to understand how food and agriculture companies can support the nonprofit community. So please welcome back John Piatti of American Farmland Trust. We're also joined by Amanda Leland, the Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Fund. Round of applause. And we have Jeff Catch, the CEO of the Rodale Institute. Round of applause. I'm such a fan of everyone on this panel, so I'm thrilled to sit here with you. Amanda, you need to know that EDF gave me my first internship ever a million years ago, so I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you.
I love stories like that. Thank you.
Me too. So I need each of you, if you can, to just give a very brief, and you know how many minutes we have, look at this clock, a very brief overview of the work that each of you do, and explain why it's so important to have a holistic approach, combining environment, energy, farmers, the protection of farmland. Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Danny. It's an honor to be here today. Rodale Institute is widely known as the global leader in regenerative organic agriculture. So our founder, J.I. Rodale, in 1942 said that healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And that's been our guiding principle for over 7 decades. So we're putting the science to substantiate the benefits of organic agriculture and comparing those systems to conventional over the long term. Rodale is really providing the necessary research, education, and technical assistance, which was just mentioned a moment ago, and filling a massive void that our land grant system is creating for farmers in this country. In many ways, we're helping farmers where that system has left off and not provided the necessary support.
Yeah. Amanda.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you again for having us.
I'm so thrilled you're here.
What a great session this morning. So EDF is an environmental organization, and we focus on practical solutions that will last. And we work in what I often call the messy middle. The messy middle is where agendas may not always align, but where real work gets done when you collaborate. And our work in agriculture and food spans the ecosystem. We work with big food and ag companies. We work with farmers and ranchers and other food producers like fishermen. And we work with policymakers and our NGO partners. So it takes a village to get real work done.
And you really have to span across all of these sectors to do it well.
You really do, and you have to have smart data and science, and you have to be thoughtful, and you have to think about how solutions are going to land and how they're going to help improve people's lives.
Again, intentionality, it's key here.
100%.
John, we've been hearing all morning about this need for a farmer-centric approach, and I just want to hear from you why you think that's so important. I mean, it's so embedded into what AFT does.
Well, thanks, Danny. You're absolutely right. It sometimes we say it begins with the land, but it doesn't matter if you don't have the stewards on that land
Right.
doing the work. And what I found in my 40 years in this field is if you start with the farmers, if you think about their needs and work backwards, you often get to the best results. AFT, like Rodale and EDF, really do take sort of a systems approach to this, which is wonderful. And like EDF, we partner a lot on policy work. We sort of operate in that middle space.
Yeah.
You know, the difference is they're doing it in a whole range of environmental issues, and we're doing it in one particular area where agriculture comes into play. But that's so important, both to think holistically, think of the system, focus, when you're talking about agriculture, focus on the farmer, and then also operate on practical, real-world solutions,
Yeah.
bring science into it. You heard the word science from
it.
all three of us. How rare is that nowadays, right? Let's focus on what works.
It shouldn't be rare, should it? Oh, God, where are we at? Jeff, we've heard a lot from companies today, and I want to talk about Rodale's approach to helping the private sector encourage transition to more regenerative or organic practices.
Great. Rodale started a technical assistance arm 4.5 years ago in partnership with our Pennsylvania State Department of Agriculture. So we now have it's the first program in the nation that is giving any farmer in our state free access to technical assistance, which essentially means that the experts at Rodale hold the hand of any farmer that raises their hand and says, I want to transition even a portion of my land to organic and regenerative production. So we're now working with over 175 farms and farm businesses in 4 years that are moving their farm in that direction. Two other quick examples. General Mills recently hired Rodale to work with all the farmers in their supply shed around wheat, oats, and tomatoes. And so we're, again, providing technical assistance to their growers in the Midwest in California. And the third example was announced last week. Our partners via Patagonia and the Holdfast Collective just funded Rodale's ability to offer technical assistance in one county, Ventura County, California, which is one of the hotbeds of chemical farming. So we're going to be working with farmers in that county to move them towards a regenerative organic approach.
Again, alliances, partnerships, all of those things that we've been hearing this morning. John, I want to turn back to you and talk about the transformation the transformation we've been talking about, but you need to encourage sort of enrollment in regenerative programs, and why is that so important?
I'm sorry, you asking
Yes,
me?
John, yes.
Well, it's critically important. We talked about all the money that Congress has provided through the Inflation Reduction Act, but if that money doesn't get used well on the land, two things are going to happen. One, we're not going to get the benefits, but we're also not going to have the ongoing political support to make that happen. And it is a challenge for farmers, particularly small and medium-sized farmers, to take advantage of some of those programs. You know, USDA is well-meaning at times, but believe me, some of the application processes, they are Byzantine at best, right? So there's two issues, the complexity, but also just the capacity of USDA. With so much more money, and to be honest, a staff that was cut pretty heavily during the last administration, they're having trouble getting those dollars out. AFT is actually playing a big role with that. In 31 states this next year, we'll have boots on the ground doing outreach, helping farmers complete conservation plans for natural resource conservation services, and helping them go through the application process.
I'm interested also in hearing how you partner with other nonprofits and NGOs.
Well, I think we all do. We have to do, right?
Yeah.
This is the only way to make it work.
Yeah.
The distinction that I'll make, or the additive, is that because we're about, we do a lot of work in the farmland protection space, as you've heard today. We partner with a lot of relatively small land trusts and conservation organizations across the country, and we also work quite actively with state departments of agriculture, because frequently they're running farmland protection programs. In 29 states, we had a direct hand in creating those programs. So like Rodale and like EDF, we partner everywhere with other NGOs, with business community, but for us, we also dive in with state government and with very small nonprofits.
John, I want to ask, and you can answer it briefly, when you're partnering with other nonprofits, you're also competing for the same dollars, and I wonder how that works.
Sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't.
Been there.
And what we try, I like to think we're really good partners. We think of the partnership first, and we sort of worry about the money after.
Sure.
It all comes down to people. Some EDs of other groups are really open to really having a real partnership, and others are very secretive, right?
Sure,
So it depends. We'll partner wherever we can, and but the funding can be a challenge. One solution to that is more money, right?
I hope everyone's hearing that who's listening. Amanda, one of the things that has impressed me about EDF, and you mentioned the messy middle, is that you're helping to lead the Dairy Methane Alliance, and I know that can be messy and interesting at the same time. Can you talk about why it was launched and why it's so important and critical right now that methane is sort of elevated?
Yeah, so the Dairy Methane Action Alliance is an alliance of corporate leaders in the food and ag sector, including Danone and Nestle and Starbucks and a whole bunch of others. And the idea is for organizations like EDF and others to provide technical support so they can confront in their supply chain the improvements that can be made to reduce methane emissions. And why is that so important today? It's because most of the warming that we are experiencing today is coming from methane. Solving the methane problem is our near-term solution on climate change. It is a must-do step along the way. It's not the only step, but it is a must-do step. And the food and from agriculture, methane is a big component of the total methane emissions in the world. There's a lot of opportunity with dairy. There's opportunity in other parts of the ag sector. But we feel like if we can work with companies to make progress on this now, it helps set forth the momentum and get some points on the board and meaningfully contribute to reducing climate pollution in our lifetimes right now.
It can happen.
It can happen.
It's like possible. And
It's very possible. When we started the conversations around this, it's probably about 15 or 18 months ago now, and we launched the Dairy Methane Action Alliance at COP last year. We've had more companies come on. We've had more momentum and more excitement about this, and it's really meeting them where they are because there's not the solutions are still being developed, right? So there's a lot of on the job thinking and creative development to come up with the plans, and then importantly, the piece that really needs some support and tackling is the financing. How do you ensure that there's money to pay for the adaptations that are going to be necessary in farm practices to ensure better outcomes for the planet?
Thanks for sharing all that. Because you all, and necessarily have to work with the private sector, I wonder what has surprised you the most, what you've learned the most, what has upset you the most. Jeff, my friend.
I would start by saying the willingness. I'm absolutely overjoyed and optimistic because of the outpouring of public companies that are seeking Rodale support at this moment and many other great organizations.
Yeah.
But they're looking for practical, timely, actionable advice, and that's why Rodale's ability to work on the ground with farmers in supply chains, we can't do that alone. We need other organizations doing the same kind of work, and we need to scale that and accelerate that. But there's a deep willingness right now. I mean, some of the biggest food companies in the world are calling Rodale. We're a 75-year-old organization.
Finally.
That's a very new dynamic. It's like, oh, our time has come. The world has finally caught up to what we've been espousing for seven and a half decades. But that's a sign of where the world is headed.
But now it's just rolling. I
Yeah.
feel like that it took that 75 years to get it all rolling. Amanda.
Well, if you think about the world today, the trust barometer says that people have confidence in companies to lead us through the changes that the world needs. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer, if you follow this. Companies it's important that they step up. It's important that they recognize what they can contribute on climate change in the context of food. But it's not just that we want them to understand this. At this point, it's in their economic business interest.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, climate is creating shocks in the system that they know that they have to solve for. And so there is a big opportunity at hand, and we hope they call all of our partners and friends in the community to ask for help, because it is a monumental untested challenge. We're still writing the playbook as we go, but this is the moment it's going to happen. And if we do more of this collaborating, it's going to really make an impact.
Absolutely. John?
And I'd agree with what's been said. The willingness of companies is there. It's in their enlightened self-interest. There's nothing wrong with that. It's momentum. It's building. It's great. One of my potential concerns is that some of these companies, even if they're approaching it for the right reasons, they don't have the history in the space. They don't understand the details necessarily.
Right.
I mean, of the three organizations you have up here, we've all been in this space a long time.
Right.
We've done things well. We've done some things poorly, right? But we have those experiences. So the only downside I have is sometimes there's some really well-intentioned but somewhat misinformed folks out there in the corporate world. But we're here as partners to help you.
Well, I want to stay on that theme for a minute because Secretary Kerry was so good at bringing this up this morning. When our political systems change, companies also sort of follow that flow. And I'm frightened, honestly, that the companies who have had this enlightened self-interest are now just going, if things don't go the way many of us think they should and will, that those companies will get off track again. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I actually wrote Dale, not only do we put ecological science to bear, comparing the systems, but we also put economic data to bear. And so what we're proving out through our long-term research is that regenerative organic agriculture is really good for the bottom line. And so it's not, in our experience, these are not politically motivated decisions. These are economically motivated decisions.
Yeah.
And by the way, I would also say that Rodale has seen bipartisan support for our work.
Yeah.
Both sides of
You
the
all
aisle
have,
are sitting in the front row at our events, and they're all ears because they see that this is just a good way for the world to move.
Yeah, Amanda, you're seeing bipartisan support in so many of these things, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's the path forward. And I think in a lot of potential outcomes in this U.S. election coming up, there's likely to be a split government.
Yeah.
And so bipartisanship may be back in play again and be a real thing.
Yeah. John, any other thoughts?
Well, I just reinforce that, and EDF and we've always worked in that middle space. That's where you can sometimes get things done, and it's good to have players who are in that space. I agree that most of the fundamental issues, support for conservation programs in the Farm Bill, they're going to remain having bipartisan support. But I think there were things on the edges. We're already seeing some of that. For instance, a couple of companies, I won't name names, have really backed away from DIJ commitments in agriculture. That is a political thing. So simultaneously, we have the foundational underpinnings of regenerative practices and farmland protection for which there will be support. But at the same time, we have increasingly seen some agricultural issues that were never particularly polarizing or politicized getting politicized.
Yeah. I want this last question to also focus on a call to action because I'm never going to get you all three on stage again. I have such an opportunity here. So Jeff, what's your call to action for this audience, for the world?
Yeah, to invest in organizations that are represented here and others like it that are on the front lines. As I mentioned at the outset, there is a gap in knowledge and technical assistance and science, and it's the land grants are not rushing into this space to the same degree that orgs like this are. So we need support, we need capacity, we need philanthropy, frankly, to do what we do.
Yeah, Amanda?
Yeah, so I love that answer. Thank you. And the U.S. did not pass a farm bill yet. We didn't really talk about that.
Right.
At some point, there needs to be a farm bill. And so my call to action is for you all to call your members of Congress and say, we need a good farm bill that's going to do the things that the community needs, invest in the future, help farmers through the transition to climate smart practices and other improvements, and make your voice heard.
Right on. Thank you.
Indeed.
John, you get the last word, my friend.
Can't disagree with either of those points, but I have to add something. I really think, and Jeff in some ways alluded to it, there is a dearth of research in some of the areas that we really need around specific practices, but mostly because so much academic work is siloed on thinking about this as a system, as our three organizations do. So I don't think that's going to come from the standard funding sources that are out there. So if it's companies, if it's individuals, let's step up and look at the bigger system and some of the research challenges there.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Please give them a round of applause. Amazing conversation. Thank you all. Thank you. This morning has flown by. You can all step off. I'm sorry. As I said, the morning has really flown by. This last conversation is one you don't want to miss. Before we dive in, I have to thank a few more of our in-kind partners, including Tyndall, Tony's Chocolonely, Traditional Medicinals, Vital Farms, Whole Chain, and Wonder and Blue Apron. Give them a round of applause, please. This couldn't have been done without them. They're all doing amazing work. So earlier this year, I was really excited and thrilled for the release of a beautiful new documentary called Feeding Tomorrow. It's a film that shows the impact our food and agriculture systems have had on people and the planet, and tells the story of a group of visionaries trying to make these systems more regenerative, more resilient. So I'm excited to introduce the filmmakers, two brothers who are behind Feeding Tomorrow, Simon and Oliver English, the co-founders of Common Table Creative. Give them a round of applause, please. These guys are, hey, nice to see you. Hey. I love these guys. They're super cool. They're super creative. They get stuff done. I've always liked talking to them. So I want, hey, it's been a little bit.
It has.
Nice to see you both.
Nice to see you too.
What's the inspiration behind this film?
So we grew up in the restaurant business. Our parents are chefs. We grew up working, washing dishes, bussing tables for many, many years. Eventually, I grew into a role designing, developing, and opening restaurants around the world. And those experiences showed me firsthand the beautiful power of food to bring people together around the world, but also how broken our food system is, how much food we're shipping around the world, how much climate change is impacting our food system, how much food is wasted. And originally, I just sought out local farmers to get more produce for the restaurants.
Yeah.
And after spending some time with farmers, I was like, man, these people are incredible. And I called Simon, who was actually at the New York Film Academy at the time, and he said, let's film an interview with them. I said, all right, that sounds cool. And that was the beginning. We were so inspired by farmers, their ability to communicate the challenges we face, but also the solutions at hand. And we thought, what if we make farmers into celebrities? What if we elevate farmers in the role of society in the way that chefs were elevated 20, 30 years ago in this country?
Yep.
And that was the beginning.
It's about time, right?
It's about time. And that was the beginning of Feeding Tomorrow, which came out on Apple TV and Amazon Prime in January, which is our first documentary about the future of food. And it led us to start our production company as well, which is the focus of what we do now.
Can we play the trailer quickly, please?
Thank
you. Music, they say, is the universal language. I think food is. Food is the one global unifier. Everybody can sit down around a table and enjoy good food.
I'm most fearful that our children won't have the opportunity to experience that.
As a species, what are we doing with our time? How are we consuming this planet?
50% of the planet's habitat is gone because of our agriculture.
People don't have a connection to what food really is and where it really comes from.
To scale our current consumption to 10 billion people is simply manifestly impossible. We don't have the arable land for that. We don't have water resources. In other words, we will be forced to change direction.
So in the food movement, the critical thing is connecting the dots between all of these different issues: health, food access, the environment.
This system over here is going to produce food, fuels, medicines, and fibers in perpetuity forever, while increasing the fertility of the soil, increasing the biodiversity. And do you hear the toads creaking off in the background? I hope you do. And the toads are eating my pests.
As a hospital system, we should be leaders in what healthy food looks like. We believe food is medicine in that it can prevent disease, or if you do have a disease, it can reverse it.
We believe that if we connect the learning around food and nutrition to other learning, that it will stick more, and that we will have folks when they leave here who are more likely to make stronger choices around the food that they consume.
We need to begin to investigate every aspect of our lives. And And let's start with what's on the plate tonight for dinner.
Thank you. Simon, what I appreciate about you is you have this very particular approach to filmmaking, especially with these producers. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I practiced it in the mirror this morning.
I love you.
This guy, I like him.
We got one.
Yeah, we got one. We'll talk. Yeah, I mean, farmers are just the coolest, most down-to-earth, literally hands in the earth people. And I mean, I've yet to meet one I don't like.
Right.
And these people, camera on, camera off, they're the same people. So they day in and day out.
Unlike chefs.
Unlike chefs. We can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just the coolest people, and they're so down to earth, and they're doing the right thing no matter if you're watching or you're not. And it's time for people off the farm to know what's happening on the farm. And if we can get cameras on there, if they can tell us their stories, if we can hopefully put it together in a way that's engaging, I think it can have a real positive impact on the world.
It really can. That storytelling that you're doing is so important.
Yeah.
So this is for both of you, really. I would be interested in learning what you're learning from working with farmers and other partners in the food movement, because you've really gone across the whole landscape of food and agriculture organizations and health organizations and climate organizations.
Absolutely. And I would say that we kind of accidentally started a production company focused on the future of food. When we were the first 2 years we were working on Feeding Tomorrow, it was literally Simon and I running around carrying all the equipment. We still carry most of the tripods. And for the first 2 years, all of the food companies, NGOs, nonprofits we were meeting with, who in some way were creating positive change in the food system, started asking us for help with short form videos. They were like, hey, you guys are here. We think you kind of know what you're talking about. We need a video for social media, for fundraising, for controlling our narrative. Can you help us out? And we're like, yeah, sure. Can you give us a couple bucks? I mean, like a couple $100 maybe in the early days, but that would fund our next bus ticket to the next farm, or our next plane ticket. And eventually we were like, all of these organizations need help with storytelling. What if, in addition to working on our film, we created a production company that was at the forefront of the future of food? And now I'm proud to say that we work with some of the world's leading food companies, NGOs, and nonprofits sharing stories about the future of food. We've been to 60 farms all over the world, filming with some of the most incredible organic and regenerative farmers. One of our favorite partners, I will say, and it's very fitting to be here with you today, is the American Farmland Trust. I was fortunate enough to meet John Piatti a couple years ago at a dinner, and we have for the past year and a half been working with the farmers that American Farmland Trust supports all throughout the country, in California, in Virginia, in New York. And we have learned so much from these farmers. First of all, as many of us in this room know, climate change is not some faraway thing. Farmers every single day are dealing with droughts, floods, heat waves. Farmers are also on the forefront of stewarding our planet. And one of the amazing things that I've learned so much from American Farmland Trust is that they're providing these incredibly important solutions for farmers, but beyond that, they're providing a network of support where farmers who are thinking about transitioning have a support system where they can find help and support to transition to organic farming. So I would say with American Farmland Trust and with a lot of our other clients we work with, farmers are at the forefront. They believe deeply and they see the positive impacts of regenerative agriculture every single day on their farm. We hear it from them. We've been to, like I said, 60 farms all over the world. And no matter the country, no matter the language, no matter the background, these principles, these regenerative principles, are the cornerstone of stewardship all around the world. And we hear it from these farmers directly. And that's why we believe so deeply in what we do and what so many of you do. And we believe that storytelling is a fundamental part of this movement, connecting farmers and what they do to the consumers of the world and beyond.
Yeah, I think that sets us, please, round of applause. I think that sets us up perfectly for the next clip. So thank you, production team.
I think that farming is an extension of who you are. It's how you think and feel and the values you have. Do you feel moved to create beautiful things? Is it important to work with nature? Do you feel that you have something to contribute that's from your heart?
I view farmers as being fundamental in our country. They are the core of our rural communities. They help maintain the landscape we care about. They help steward the environment. And without them, we could not live. It's that simple.
No farmers, no food, right? I'm.
Just real quick, that was the trailer for a 7-minute piece that we just worked on and released with American Farmland Trust. You can find the whole video, as well as a bunch of other projects we're working on with them online and on their website as well.
Can you talk more about that project and what it's like working with them?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. I love American Farmland Trust.
Me too.
Again, I know, right? It's how fit. Again, it's yeah, and that handsome guy was just right there. Yeah, pretty well shot video too, wouldn't you say?
And edited.
And edited. Yeah, it's another opportunity to get on these farms and meet these incredible people, especially with the work that American Farmland Trust is doing. Like, we need to get these voices off the farm and into the screens of everyone, young people of all ages, because they need to know what AFT is doing. What do we say? They're the...
I say that they are one of the most important, if not the most important organization in our country, and they have been for decades that not enough people know about,
Right.
and that is changing. Believe me. And we are on a mission to help them change that, and they've been doing the good work for decades. And I remember growing up with the no farms, no food stickers, seeing them everywhere, and we were like, what does that even mean? But it's important, and we believe deeply in that work.
Yeah, they're super cool, and like farmers are amazing, and just everyone needs to know about them. And I just to have the opportunity to go to these farms and meet these people, like I said before, I mean, it's such a privilege.
It is a privilege, and one
Yep.
of the quotes that stands out for me from that clip is, do you feel moved to create beautiful things?
Yep.
And farmers absolutely do, and you both do.
Yep.
Talk about that.
Absolutely.
Alder?
Sure.
I'm out of words.
I got words. You know, I think the industries that we're up against, let's call them big food, but we are dealing with and up against food companies who have a lot of money, who are marketing very addictive products to us and our children in every part of American society. And they have multi-billion-dollar budgets to do so, and they've been doing so for years. And so what Simon and I talk about and why we feel so passionately about our work is because we believe that this movement, this regenerative food movement, needs to elevate our storytelling, elevate our communication, and elevate how we share ourselves to the world. And that is why short-form storytelling, documentary filmmaking, storytelling of all types,
Reels on Instagram,
Right.
TikTok, like, is paramount to this movement.
Yep.
We need to meet people where they're at. And I think that there has never been a more exciting time to be a part of this movement, because while we know so much about the challenges, we've never known so much about the challenges, environmentally, health, societally. We've also never had such a clear picture and vision about the solutions. We've never had more opportunities. Consumers have never had more opportunities to support regenerative products at the grocery stores, to go to the farmer's market, to understand that their purchasing behavior can have a fundamental, positive impact on the stewardship of our planet. And we as storytellers, and we as the food movement ecosystem that is represented in this room, need to dial up our work. And we need to elevate the work of these farmers and these amazing food companies. And one more note on that. I think from a storytelling communications perspective, we need to connect human health to environmental health. And we have seen this on every single farm. I know this from being in the restaurant business, from our parents being chefs, from knowing people in the food world. There is a fundamental connection between the healthiest farms and the healthiest soils and the flavor that comes from that food. And the healing power. All right, there we go. So the food with the most flavor is the most healing, is the most nutrient dense, and when we support those foods, we are supporting the best farming practices. And so for us as a movement, I think it is so critical. A lot of people care about the environmental component, but everyone cares about health.
Yeah.
And if we can lead and lean into that and connect human health, which I know we all know there's a lot of issues with human health right now, but if we can connect human health to soil health, to environmental health, to planetary health, that is a winning argument that we need to lean into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And make it fun and engaging. I mean,
Right.
let's have a party. Let's save the world and have fun while doing it.
And that reminds me, like, none of this works without deliciousness, right?
Yep,
And
yeah.
the taste.
Yes.
And so whether we're talking about health or the environment, or making sure that family farmers have a leg to stand on, it all has to come back to the taste and the deliciousness.
Absolutely.
What I like about you both is sometimes filmmakers are so precious about their film, right? But you mentioned Reels and TikTok. There's so many ways to communicate, and film is an important part of reaching young folks. Can you talk about the reaction from Gen Z to the work that you're doing?
As the closer one to Gen Z, I gotta let you respond to that one.
I'll jump in for this one, Oliver. Yeah, I mean, my generation were scared, a little pessimistic, and I'll say this. When I was in like the 5th grade, I saw An Inconvenient Truth, and it like really scared me. It was the first time I realized that grown-ups weren't taking care of the world in the way I thought, and I was introduced to this monster of climate change, and like, I got goosebumps right now because it really freaked me out. And from that time, I was like, we have one planet. Like, why are we not doing everything we can to save this planet? Like, wouldn't we all sleep better at night knowing that like we're doing the right thing? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a farmer, but I can hold a camera and get on a farm and get those voices out. And a lot of my friends are super interested in this because of the work we've done. And it's just so important, man. It's like, we don't have a lot of time, and like even kids younger than me, like they really are pessimistic about this, and like that's what I'm saying. Like, it has to be exciting, it has to be fun, it has to be engaging.
Yeah.
It's got to be like a Nike commercial,
Yeah,
right?
it totally does.
Like,
just do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Just farming.
I think they got that one, but we'll come up with someone else.
We'll work on the IP.
We'll workshop it.
And we have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
You know, like we made a feature-length documentary, and it took us 6 years, and it's some of the greatest work of our careers thus far.
Yeah.
But we also have been doing a lot more short-form work these days, and like we are on a mission to educate and inspire people to think differently about food.
Yeah.
Where it comes from, how it grows, and how it impacts the world around us. And we are not beholden to one type of media to do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just long-form documentaries. Not everyone's going to watch a long-form documentary. In fact, most people won't. So we've been doing short-form. We've been doing 10 minutes. We've been doing 5 minutes. We've been doing a lot of 25-second reels.
That's all you got for Gen Z, man.
And that works. So let's not be precious about it, but let's take elevated storytelling to meet people where they're at. You know, I think even food products should have a little, QR code that has.
That was my idea.
A quick link. Yeah. I take a lot of his ideas and take credit for it, so forgive me.
I'm just joking.
Has a 30-second video that Simon will make that talks about the farmer and where it comes from, and how do we increase transparency? How do we increase the power of food?
Yeah.
And storytelling is the core of that.
Yeah, I love the sibling rivalry. It's great.
It's a partnership. If our sister was here, she would be the rival.
Sure. So, I want to end on action. After people see the short form doc about AFT, or after they see Feeding Tomorrow, what do you hope they do?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and I was talking to my friend Finian here from Kiss the Ground a little bit earlier today, that there has never been as exciting of a time, as an important of a time, as a monumental of a time to be part of the food movement as there is right now. There are more products in the store today than there were 5 months ago, 6 months ago, or a year ago with the regenerative organic label. There are more opportunities now than there ever have been for everyday consumers to support this movement through their purchases. And we're not talking changing everything that they eat. We're talking rice, beans, milk, meat, simple staple foods. There are now incredible regenerative options. So you can make that decision.
Yeah.
So what we try to encourage people to do is say, you don't need to go into your refrigerator and throw away everything, which we've been told in the past. You don't need to change everything you're eating, but you can go to the grocery store and make this one shift to an organic regenerative product. Maybe you realize the flavor's a little better, as I love to cook, and I realize the flavor's a little better. And then you make a second choice, and then a third choice, and then you change your olive oil.
Yep.
And one step after the next,
The ripple.
the ripple,
Yeah.
we can teach people that this is the time to transition to being stewards of our planet through the food that we eat, through the farmers that we support, and through the politicians that we elect. And that starts with our food choices.
Yep.
Yep.
And the good thing is, it doesn't have to detract. So much of the environmental movement for a long time, I think, has been about how do we do less bad. This movement, this moment, is about how do we do more good through the food that we support, through the food that we put in our cart, and the farmers that we support with our dollars. And that is what American Farmland Trust is doing. That is what so many organizations with people who are represented here are doing. And that's what we believe in as storytellers and are deeply passionate about. And that's what, by the way, Food Tank has been about for a very, very long time. Yeah. And I would just like to say, Danny, I would also just like to say, I appreciate deeply, and as someone, and I know there's a lot of people here who care about food, that's why we're all here, but as someone who really cares about food and wants to spend the rest of our lives working on these issues, we're deeply grateful for all the work that Food Tank does to convene leaders in this space and build upon this incredible ecosystem. Because this ecosystem is what is going to change the future of food. And we're doing it right now. So thank you, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hate that we have to end on that, but thank you to this wonderful family who I love so much. You are awesome, both of you.
Love you too, Danny.
Give them a round of applause. I want to stay right here. I want to take another moment to thank all of our speakers who joined us this afternoon. They were amazing, right? Round of applause. Thank you. Another big thanks to WNYC and the production team. They are saving my life every day. I love them. Thank you. Give them a round of applause. American Farmland Trust, give it up. Thank you to my co-founder, Bernie Pollock. None of this would happen without him. Our wonderful content director, Elena Seeley. She keeps the trains running. Kenzie Wade, who is directing all of our events and makes them run smoothly. Jessica Levi and Jared Kaufman, and all of the work behind the scenes from our volunteers, Annie Rubin, Wanaya Ahmed, and Jillian Fineglass. Sorry, Jillian. And finally, thanks to all of you who have been watching and here with us in person. We're so grateful that you're interested in these issues, that you support these issues, that you ask good questions. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause. Please stay for snacks and beverages. We are so thrilled you were here.